Chapter 182. The entire manor was in a state of chaos as the surrounding houses were set ablaze. Panicked screams rose and fell as several groups of masked men in black ran for their lives. The Griffin Legion soldiers chased after them, throwing the manor into complete chaos. "Wait for us." Just as Han Shuo, Emily, and Selena were fleeing in another direction, two slim figures in black suddenly appeared. One of them hastily called out. Han Shuo knew that this was Phoebe when he heard the voice. The other person was Candace. The two of them had been setting fire to the houses since the chaos had begun. As a fire element magical swordsman, Candace was very familiar with this sort of thing. After a while, the entire manor had been turned into a sea of flames. Behind the two of them were several squads of Griffin Legion soldiers, as well as an old man with a grave expression and an overbearing aura. He wielded a long sword that radiated with silver fighting aura. This person quickly flew over. His sharp aura caused people to not dare to look directly at him. The large sword in his hand gently swung. Wherever the silver dochi passed, all the obstacles in front of him, including some trees and rocks, were all shattered into fine powder. Even the ground that was cut by the silver dochi split open and formed many gullies. Its power was terrifying to the extreme. "He's Clark's master, Great Swordmaster Gabriel. Let's get out of here quickly." Candace was anxious as she called out and rushed towards Han Shuo at an even faster speed. Gabriel's speed was exceedingly fast, far surpassing the Griffin Legion soldiers behind him. As a great swordmaster, Gabriel's strength was exceedingly frightening. Han Shuo only needed one glance to know that no one on his side could stop him in a one-on-one fight. Han Shuo's expression tensed as he saw Gabriel's speed increase and was about to catch up to Phoebe and Candace. He looked at Gilbert beside him and suddenly thought of how terrifying Gilbert was after transforming into a dark dragon. He immediately called out coldly, "Damn it, hurry up and transform." At the same time, Han Shuo's attention was unprecedentedly focused as he used his mind to control the demon's lair edge, whistling fiercely as it danced towards Great Swordmaster Gabriel. Magical yuan wildly surged into the demon's lair edge and exploded out with a thick demonic aura, mixed with a strange aura of scorching heat and cold. The demon's lair edge whistled through the air and appeared directly in front of the Great Swordmaster Gabriel, thrusting towards him. That strange cold and heat brought with it an aura of extreme danger, causing Gabriel to be startled. Snorting coldly, Gabriel suddenly waved the longsword in his hand. A cloud of silver fireworks suddenly blossomed in the air in front of him, as if a sky full of stars had shattered into specks of starlight. Han Shuo, who was controlling the demon's lair edge, suddenly felt an enormous force emanate from that ball of gorgeous silver light, tightly sucking the demon's lair edge that was attempting to stab at Gabriel. An enormous force suddenly surged into the demon's lair edge. Gabriel's silver fighting aura was exceedingly domineering as it crashed onto the demon's lair edge, as if wanting to destroy everything in its path. The demon's lair edge buzzed within the ball of silver light. This domineering force entangled the demon's lair edge in an exceedingly short amount of time, mixing together with the scorching cold demonic aura created by Han Shuo's magical yuan. The demonic aura formed by the mystical glacial spellfire quickly dissipated. Cursing inwardly, Han Shuo knew that he'd only been training in demonic magic for a short period of time. No matter how wondrous his demonic magic was, a few short months of training was still no match for the fighting aura that Gabriel had painstakingly gathered over decades. It was already unimaginable that the demonic aura within the demon's lair edge hadn't completely dissipated after such a short period of contact. However, because of the demon's lair edge's obstruction, Gabriel's footsteps finally slowed down as he was about to catch up to Phoebe and Candace. The feeling that something was wrong was becoming more and more apparent. The demon's lair edge was actually unable to retract due to the tight bindings, despite his mental summons. Han Shuo couldn't help but be greatly shocked. Thinking quickly for a moment, Han Shuo's heart tightened as he focused his mental strength and quickly chanted a magical incantation. Two bone spears suddenly flew out and shot towards Gabriel. Emily also cast a dark magic spell in the moment that Han Shuo made his move. At the same time, Han Shuo used all his strength and the magical yuan within his body circulated wildly. He suddenly tightened his mind and took advantage of Gabriel's distraction to deal with Han Shuo and Emily's magical attacks to forcibly free the demon's lair edge from the ball of silver light. Because he'd expended too much energy and the speed at which the magical yuan circulated had exceeded the limits of Han Shuo's body, Han Shuo couldn't help but spit out a mouthful of blood. He'd already suffered minor injuries. "You're hurt, put me down. I think I've recovered." Caspian, who was on Han Shuo's back, could clearly feel Han Shuo's body tremble violently. He immediately spoke to Han Shuo when he saw that Han Shuo couldn't help but spit out a mouthful of blood. Gabriel had already destroyed Han Shuo's bone spears and Emily's dark magic in a short amount of time. A pair of cold grey eyes swept towards Han Shuo and Emily at this moment, especially when he looked at Han Shuo. He seemed to be extremely curious about Han Shuo's magical yuan and the demon's lair edge. Han Shuo turned his head to see that Gilbert had already transformed into an enormous dark dragon. Gilbert's body covered in black scales crashed fiercely into the wall in front of Han Shuo and the others, collapsing loudly. "All of you, get on his back." Han Shuo couldn't help but be overjoyed when he saw Gilbert reveal his dark dragon form. He immediately yelled out and threw Caspian, who was on his back, far away in Gilbert's direction. Han Shuo used a gentle force when he did this. When Caspian landed on Gilbert, Caspian's momentum would be slowed down and wouldn't cause too much damage to his body. Other than AI Mealy, who already knew Gilbert's identity, Gilbert's sudden transformation into a black dragon caused everyone here to be instantly shocked. All of them stared at the enormous Gilbert with their mouths agape, and for a moment, their brains were too slow to react. "Griffin Knights, all Griffin Knights gather here. Archers, spear wielders, and those with crossbows, get ready. You can all be brave warriors to slay dragons." Gabriel's high-pitched yells suddenly rang out and traveled to the other parts of the manor. "Hurry up and get on." Han Shuo couldn't help but yell out again when he saw that Candace and Phoebe were still staring at Gilbert's enormous body with some shock. Dark dragons had always been known as the most evil and greedy of the dragon tribe. They liked to live in the dark and damp underground world, and were shameless and greedy for money. They could be considered the embodiment of evil on the surface. It was normal that Phoebe and Candace couldn't react to the sudden appearance of a dark dragon in a place like this. But when Han Shuo urged them a second time, the two girls finally recognized the relationship between this dark dragon and Han Shuo. They looked at Han Shuo in shock and flew onto Gilbert's back at the same time. Han Shuo relaxed when he saw that Emily, Candace, Phoebe, and even the druid Caspian had all leapt onto Gilbert's back. He deployed the art of the demonic ninth heavens, and flew towards Gilbert as well. He instructed, "Leave immediately, but don't fly high into the air or you'll become a target. Esteemed master, please help me block the arrows and spears that are shot at me." Gilbert's mouth was now filled with sharp teeth, and the draconic breath he exhaled carried a strong pungent odor. His voice also seemed a bit more dignified than before. "I know. This place is a mess anyways. If there's anyone in your way, destroy them all. You don't have to worry about anything else as long as we can escape this place." Han Shuo didn't give the dark dragon any restraints at all when he heard Han Shuo's instructions. Caspian seemed to feel a bit bad when he heard Han Shuo's instructions, but when he thought of how Han Shuo had already helped him many times and that Han Shuo was also thinking about the lives of his group, he moved his lips but didn't say anything in the end. "Waha, all right then, I won't hold back." Gilbert cheered excitedly amidst his dignified voice. A stream of acidic venom suddenly sprayed out from its fanged maw into the distance. The Griffin Legion archers who'd just gotten into formation all retreated in panic as soon as this dragon breath containing acidic venom shot out. Those who didn't dodge in time had their skin and flesh fester in the blink of an eye after being touched by the acidic venom. It looked like only death awaited them. Dozens of griffin knights suddenly appeared in the distance after the dragon breath shot out. They all wielded long silver spears and wore shining silver armor as they flew over on their griffins. The person at the front had a sturdy body and didn't look young. Silver fighting aura shot out from the tip of the spear, making the silver spear with all sorts of complicated patterns seem even longer and narrower. Hurry, Bob Asher is here. It looks like the Calamity Church has indeed failed. Han Shua turned pale with fright when he saw that the dark dragon still wanted to act arrogantly. He stomped on the dark dragon's body and hastily gave the order. Chapter 183. Dozens of Griffin Knights, including Bob Asher and Great Swordmaster Gabriel, were present. Little Dark Dragon Gilbert would be courting death if he were to face such a formidable force head-on. Gilbert was quite tactful under Han Shua's urging. He didn't say a word as he charged out of the hole in the wall. The archers and spearmen who had regained their footing in Gabriel's direction suddenly fired in unison, filling the air with arrows and spears as they flew towards Gilbert. Han Shua and the others had long since made their preparations. Emily released her dark magic, forming an oval-shaped magic shield in the sky. Han Shua also chanted the dark mist magic, covering a large area in darkness. Candace, Phoebe, and Caspian all used all sorts of techniques to cut down the arrows that pierced their way. Han Shua had already suffered some injuries from his previous exchange with Gabriel. It was a good thing that Han Shua could also use necromancy magic in addition to his magical yuan. As Han Shua chanted the incantation, several zombie warriors and 2 hate warriors suddenly appeared on the ground, as well as dozens of skeletal warriors, forcibly blocking the hole in the wall that Gilbert had blasted open. These summoned dark creatures acted as meat shields, blocking the hole in the wall and causing many attacks to land on them. Add to that the effects of Emily's magic shield, Han Shua's dark mist, and Phoebe, Candace, and Caspian's assistance, Gilbert's enormous body wasn't harmed in the slightest. The dark creatures that Han Shua had summoned were covered in arrows and spears. When the Griffin Legion soldiers drew near, Han Shua once again chanted the corpse explosion spell that he'd just learned, causing the flesh and blood of 2 hate warriors to fly through the air. The dozen or so soldiers on the side were caught off guard and all fell to the ground. Take to the skies and leave this place as quickly as possible. Taking advantage of the fact that the dark creatures were still blocking the wall and the archers and spearmen were temporarily unable to display their might, Han Shua abruptly yelled. Gilbert didn't hesitate after hearing Han Shua's call. His enormous body whipped its tail and 2 houses on the side collapsed, sending boulders flying and trees snapping. Gilbert then yelled loudly for a while as his enormous body, which had been only a few meters above the ground, suddenly shot towards the dark sky. Stop right there. Bob Asher, who was on the back of the griffin, had miraculously charged over at this moment. The silver spear in his hand suddenly shot out like a silver meteor, its tail trailing a brilliant afterglow as it shot towards Gilbert's back. As a sky rider, Bob Asher had been through hundreds of battles over the years and had seen all sorts of situations. Not only was his own strength ferocious, but his battle experience was also incomparably rich. He knew that it wouldn't be easy to catch up to Gilbert with the griffin's speed. The only way was to injure Gilbert first. Otherwise, even with a large group of griffin riders behind him, it would be impossible to keep Han Shua and the others here. This spear had been condensed with Bob Asher's surging fighting aura and was dazzlingly dazzling in the pitch-black night sky. The sharp aura it contained brought enormous pressure to Han Shua and the others. The spear whistled sharply as it flew over, seeming to borrow the force of the wind. Han Shua quickly chanted another bone spear incantation, and 2 bone spears abruptly landed on the incoming silver spear according to Han Shua's will. Just as the 2 bone spears flew towards the silver spear, 2 crisp pa-pa sounds were heard before they shattered. The silver spear's momentum was not hindered at all, and it continued to shoot straight towards him. Just as Han Shuo was startled, Emily chanted a dark magic spell and the Grim Reaper's scythe once again blossomed in the air. As Emily waved the staff in her hand downwards, the Grim Reaper's scythe formed from dark magic swiftly chopped at the silver spear that continued to shoot towards them. Another burst of popping sounds rang out as Emily's slender figure on Gilbert's body suddenly staggered and involuntarily took a few steps back. The Grim Reaper's scythe formed from her mental strength also turned to dust in the blink of an eye, just like the two bone spears Han Shuo had just shot out. But because of Emily's Grim Reaper's scythe, much of the fighting aura on the silver spear had dissipated. Whether it was the dazzling silver light it emitted or the speed at which it attacked, all of it had suddenly decreased. Han Shuo's heart ached at this moment, but he didn't have the time to comfort Emily. His two eyes focused unblinkingly on the spear, ready to summon the demon's lair edge at any moment. Two crossbow bolts suddenly shot out from Phoebe and Candace's hands. Candace's bolt missed, but Phoebe's directly collided with the silver spear that had been weakened. Because of this crossbow bolt, the speed of the spear was once again reduced. Gilbert's speed had increased by this time, and he'd already flown into the horizon in the blink of an eye. He'd left Bob Asher behind on his griffin, and the distance between the two was still gradually increasing. Pass down my orders, the entire city is on lockdown. No one is allowed to enter, but not leave. Shut down all the transportation matrices that lead to other cities. No one is allowed to activate them without my orders, or they'll be killed without question. Bob Asher's wild roars traveled far and wide, and even Han Shuo and the others could hear them clearly. Are you all right? Han Shuo's body relaxed when he saw that he was temporarily out of danger, but his expression tightened as he rushed to Emily's side, supporting Emily and asking urgently. Emily tore off the mask on her face and her face was a bit pale, but her heart was filled with sweetness when she saw Han Shuo's sincere concern for her. She laughed lightly and said a bit weakly, "I'm fine, I've just overused my magic." "Don't worry, how are you?" "I'm fine as well, I'll recover after a few days of rest." Han Shuo also smiled and comforted Emily. On the other side, Phoebe's expression was a bit uncomfortable when she saw Han Shuo and Emily's intimate actions. However, Emily was injured right now, and she'd been injured while protecting the others. It wasn't appropriate for her to say anything when Han Shuo expressed his concern for her. Coughing lightly, Phoebe walked to Han Shuo's side amidst the howling cold wind. Worry also appeared on her beautiful face as she reached out a slender hand to wipe away the blood at the corner of Han Shuo's mouth. She said reproachfully, "You're spitting out blood and you say you're fine." Phoebe's light cough and her current actions immediately made Emily realize something. Emily, who'd been supported by Han Shuo, smiled lightly and pushed Han Shuo away nonchalantly. She maintained a distance of 2 arms' length from Han Shuo before saying, "What do we do now? Now that Valen City has been completely sealed off, I'm starting to worry about the safety of others with Bob Asher's power." Han Shuo's face was dark as he looked at Emily. Nodding, Emily said, "That's right." His fury just now wasn't something that could be easily pacified. All along, the transportation matrices connecting Valen City to other cities have never been sealed. This is equivalent to cutting off all communication between Valen City and the outside world. Whether it's orders or news from the Empire or other places, Valen City won't be able to receive them. Bob Asher definitely won't let the matter rest if he dares do this. My opponent this time is Water Archmage Howard, Bob Asher's follower. I originally had the confidence to take care of him, but he found helpers and captured me alive in the end. He wanted some things from the Druidic Order after I was captured, but I would rather die than give them to him. But before you came over tonight, he said that he wanted to capture my little Angelica to threaten me. I'm worried about her safety. Caspian finally came clean at this moment. Honored Master, just where are we flying to? If you don't make a decision soon, we'll have to leave Valen City. Gilbert's voice suddenly sounded in the howling cold wind. Valen City was in a mess now, so the best thing to do was to leave as soon as possible. Leaving this circle of trouble was the wisest choice. However, if they left now, those who were still in Valen City would likely run into great trouble. Han Shuo had a hesitant expression on his face as he looked at the faces of the others. My senior brother treats me very well, I can't ignore his safety. Phoebe spoke resolutely when she saw Han Shuo look at her. I can't give up on my comrade. Candace followed. When Han Shuo looked at Emily, Emily smiled sweetly and said to Han Shuo, whatever you say. Gilbert, turn around and return to the hotel. After a moment of silence, Han Shuo stomped down on the back of the black dragon and called out lowly. Chapter 184. Gilbert had originally pulled away from Asher and was about to fly out of Valen City's range, but he had no choice but to turn back when he heard Han Shuo's orders. He complained, Honored Master, even the great Gilbert can't stop a Griffin Legion. We'll definitely be discovered if we return to the city with such a large commotion. Cut the crap and fly back to the hotel as fast as possible. We'll pick up the people we need to pick up before we leave. Han Shuo snorted lightly and spoke to Gilbert beneath him. As a dark dragon, there wasn't much space on Gilbert's back for a person to stand on. Even if Han Shuo returned to the hotel, he wouldn't be able to take everyone away at once. He had to start thinking about what to do now. His thoughts raced as he waited for Gilbert to enter Valen City from the outskirts he'd just left. The sharp-eyed Han Shuo had already spotted the Griffin Knights high in the sky, whistling as they patrolled the area. With Gilbert's size, there was no way he'd be able to hide from the Griffin Knights if he wanted to return to the hotel from here. Han Shuo mused for a moment and suddenly opened his mouth. Gilbert, land immediately before the Griffin Knights discover us. We'll return to the hotel from the ground. Gilbert didn't waste any more words under Han Shuo's orders and flew a certain distance at a low altitude, allowing everyone to land on his back. When everyone had landed, Gilbert's enormous body gradually shrank under the cover of the black light, finally turning back into the tanned and somewhat handsome young Gilbert. We all wore masks in ASCII's manner just now. Now that we're entering the city with our original appearances, they may not be able to recognize us. Han Shuo glanced at Emily and said. Indeed, but if a group of strangers like us appears together and is discovered by the Griffin Legion, they'll definitely become suspicious. I think we should split up so that no one will associate us with anything. Emily looked at everyone and said. Well, everyone should know the way back. Let's split into 2 groups and go back. If there's any danger in the hotel, we'll meet up at the block behind. Han Shuo nodded and agreed to Emily's arrangement. After Han Shuo said this, Phoebe naturally stood next to Han Shuo. As a magic pet, Gilbert naturally could not be separated from his master. Emily scanned the crowd and spoke again, since this is the case, I'll go with Miss Candace and Elder Caspian. Before Elder Caspian enters the city, use a magic potion to disguise his appearance. Otherwise, he'll be easily recognized, Han Shuo reminded and said to Phoebe and Gilbert, let's go. The current Valen City was even more chaotic than the day of Clark's assassination. The chief of the Griffin Legion had used the invasion of Kasi Empire assassins as an excuse to seal off the entire city. Soldiers of the Griffin Legion whizzed past on the streets and in the sky. They immediately went up to interrogate strangers when they saw them. Under Han Shuo's keen eyes and ears, Han Shuo's group of 3 took some rugged and complicated paths and weaved through the shadows of rows of eaves, avoiding many Griffin Legion soldiers along the way. Whether it was Gilbert or Phoebe, they were both people with extraordinary strength. Han Shuo's powerful memory after developing his brain region was put to full use on this return trip. The various complicated paths within Valen City were like a map reflected in Han Shuo's heart. Han Shuo's direction was erratic as he made his way back. In the end, Phoebe felt that they were getting further and further away from the hotel. If it wasn't for the fact that Phoebe was well aware of Han Shuo's mysteriousness, she would have doubted whether Han Shuo was taking the correct path. After taking many small paths and twisting paths, Phoebe and Gilbert were both feeling a bit dizzy and disoriented when the back door of the hotel suddenly appeared in front of them. Han Shoa had actually avoided all the Griffin Legion soldiers on the ground and in the sky along the way. Using some complicated paths, the three of them didn't encounter any danger and directly appeared in front of the hotel. This is too miraculous. Phoebe couldn't help but exclaim softly when she saw Elaine's hotel. Her eyes sparkled as she stared at Han Shoa in praise. "Honored master, my head is dizzy from all the twists and turns. How did you remember such complicated paths?" Gilbert also had a look of shock on his face as he looked at Han Shoa in disbelief. Pointing at his own head, Han Shoa chuckled, "It can remember everything clearly." These words were useless, but even if Han Shoa hadn't lied and explained that his brain region had been developed, the two of them still wouldn't have been able to understand. Therefore, Han Shoa naturally didn't want to say anything more. Han Shoa took a deep breath after saying these words. His eyes sparkled with a black light as he focused on Elaine's hotel. His sensitive ears also focused on the hotel after he focused his attention. Contrary to Han Shoa's expectations, there was nothing out of the ordinary about the hotel. Han Shoa listened for a bit and found that everything was normal inside. There were no sounds of panic, nor were there any sounds of people from the Griffin Legion going over to question them. "You and Gilbert head over first. I'll go find Lawrence and tell them to leave the city as soon as possible," Han Shoa said softly as he looked at Phoebe beside him. Phoebe's beautiful face twisted to look at Han Shoa and she reached out a jade hand. She tightened her grip on Han Shoa's rough hand and said softly, "Be careful. Don't worry, nothing will happen to me." Han Shoa responded with a smile and said to Gilbert, "If there's danger, protect her." Han Shoa was like a shadow in the night as soon as he'd finished speaking, hiding in the darkness behind him and disappearing without a trace in the blink of an eye. Han Shoa heard a strange sound on the way to Lawrence's residence. His footsteps quickened as he landed on a tree branch. Han Shoa saw Lawrence and Lucky in disguise, as well as the two swordsmen he'd seen last time. They were actually running in the direction of the hotel with Belinda and Johnny of the Calamity Church. Coughing lightly, Han Shoa suddenly called out softly from atop the tree, "Lawrence." Han Shoa's cough startled the group greatly. They tightly gripped the weapons in their hands and immediately faced the tree, almost directly attacking. "Brian, what are you doing here? Shouldn't you have left the city a long time ago? We clearly saw you ride the dark dragon in the manor and leave Asher in the dust." Lawrence looked at Han Shoa with astonishment and said in confusion. "We're back again. Cut the nonsense and meet up at the hotel. We'll leave immediately, we can't stay in Valen City for a moment longer." Han Shoa didn't have the time to explain too much. He casually replied and flew down from the tree, returning to the hotel with Lawrence and the others. Now that he was up close, Han Shoa discovered that not only had Johnny's buttocks been hit, but there was also a large patch of blood on his chest. It looked like his injuries weren't light. Although Belinda still wore a mask, her gaze wasn't as sharp as before. She looked a bit frail and likely had been injured as well. Lawrence and the others had only acted as the mediators in this operation and hadn't participated in the battle. Therefore, they all looked to be in good spirits and it was obvious that none of them had been injured. However, what Han Shoa couldn't figure out was why he was with Belinda. Han Shoa hadn't allowed them to interact with each other before this operation. Logically speaking, they shouldn't know each other. Hesitating for a moment, Han Shoa couldn't help but ask the questions in his heart. He looked at Belinda and then at Lawrence, asking in confusion, "How did you know each other?" "Oh, it's just that when we were retreating just now, we discovered that we were on the same side, so we walked together." Lawrence looked at Han Shoa as if nothing had happened and explained faintly. Belinda nodded when she heard Lawrence's words. "It was because of Mr. Lawrence's help and the large number of experts chasing after you that we were able to seize the opportunity to escape. So that's how it is." Han Shua felt that things weren't so simple, but since Belinda and Lawrence had spoken thus, Han Shua couldn't pry any further. Just as Han Shua, Lawrence, and the others were about to arrive at the hotel, Han Shua heard a squad of Griffin Legion soldiers questioning the owner of the hotel, Elaine, from afar. Han Shua could hear Elaine's hearty laughter even from afar. She didn't seem to be worried about the safety of the hotel at all. However, with his astonishing eyesight, Han Shua discovered that another soldier seemed to have received some sort of order when the squad was talking to Elaine. He quietly left the hotel and quickly made his way to the street in the distance, waving at the two Griffin Knights circling in the air. Oh no, we must have been exposed. Although he didn't know why, Han Shua knew that Elaine's hotel was no longer safe. He called out softly and Han Shua no longer concealed his tracks as he dashed towards the hotel like a bolt of lightning. Chapter 185. Have there really been no suspicious characters recently? An officer of the Griffin Legion looked at the owner of the hotel, Elaine, and asked. Honorable Sir, our hotel has always had a good reputation in Valen City, and we've often cooperated with Master Asher's work. If there had been any suspicious characters, we would have reported it to you immediately. The fat Elaine was still merrily smiling as she guaranteed that there wouldn't be any problems with the hotel. I think there shouldn't be any problems with your hotel either. The officer's expression was calm as he spoke gravely. A shrill whistle suddenly sounded at this moment as a faint red ray of light streaked through the darkness, piercing towards the officer with a swoosh. The officer who'd been feigning civility with Elaine had long since been on guard, otherwise he wouldn't have sent his soldiers to ask for reinforcements from the outside. Just as the sharp whistle sounded, the battle-hardened officer unsheathed his sword with a chong sound. A dark green doe chi suddenly bloomed from the hilt of the sword and immediately went to meet the strand of red light that was shot at him. The demon's lair edge fiercely collided with the blade of his sword with a clang, extinguishing the fighting aura emanating from his body and carving out a nick in the blade he was tightly gripping. At the same time, a figure flashed by like lightning as an iron fist suddenly enlarged and punched towards the officer. Startled, the officer raised his empty left hand and blocked his chest, attempting to block Han Shua's punch. What had been an ordinary punch suddenly flared up with purple spell fire when it reached his chest. A cold aura suddenly enveloped him and the aura immediately invaded his limbs and bones when Han Shua's fist landed on his chest. It was as if the officer had fallen into an icy cavern in that moment. Frost appeared on his hair and eyebrows, and his entire body was piercingly cold. He didn't even have the strength to raise his hand. Han Shua withdrew his tightly clenched right fist and grabbed the demon's lair edge that was hovering in the air. He turned around and yelled at the astonished Elaine, "This place is no longer safe. Call out everyone in the hotel and leave now." After recovering from the shock, Elaine quickly recognized the situation. At this time, the strange cries of the Sky Griffins were rapidly approaching, which meant that Han Shua's judgment was correct. Because of the call of the person who had just left, the Griffin Knights circling the sky were already starting to come over. But Lady Emily hasn't returned yet. When he was about to leave, he suddenly remembered that Emily was the leader of this mission, so he couldn't help but say, "You don't have to worry about that. She'll be back soon." Han Shua grabbed the demon's lair edge and immediately rushed into the midst of the other soldiers who had reacted. He quickly responded. Elaine didn't say anything else after hearing Han Shua's words. She nodded and turned to the back, yelling out a few words. Angelica, a few mercenaries from the Battle Fire mercenary band, as well as Phoebe and Gilbert, who had just arrived, all suddenly appeared. As soon as these people appeared, they didn't wait for Han Shua's orders before immediately joining the fray, killing the remaining Griffin Legion soldiers beside Han Shua one by one. "Go, leave this place immediately from the back." Although these Griffin Legion soldiers had died, this place had already been exposed. Add to that the person who had just informed them, this place would definitely become the focus of the Griffin Legion's attack, especially since two Griffin Legion soldiers had discovered the abnormalities in this place. Under Han Shua's orders, the group didn't pack anything and abandoned the hotel, turning around and rushing to the back. Although the owner of the hotel, Elaine, didn't train in any fighting aura, she was extremely fast when she ran and didn't become a burden. Another clamor of shouts suddenly sounded from the distance. Han Shua's retreating body flipped over and landed on a nearby rooftop. He looked into the distance and discovered that Emily, Candace, and Caspian were on another street, fighting and retreating as they made their way over. Behind them was a line of 12 Griffin Legion cavalry. They rode warhorses adorned with silver armor and held sharp spears in their hands, whistling as they chased after Emily's group. They seemed to have discovered the identities of Emily's group. "This way, hurry up!" Han Shua suddenly yelled out from the rooftop, his voice like a sharp weapon as it traveled to Emily's location. Lawrence's group, who had arrived a beat too late, met up with Phoebe, Candace, and the others at the back of the hotel. Up until now, everyone who had participated in the operation against Bob Asher had actually gathered together again in this hotel. "Gather together, we'll kill our way out before the rest of the Griffin Legion arrives." Standing on the rooftop, Han Shua seemed to have become the leader of this operation as he yelled out loudly. "Steal the warhorses!" Emily, who had been rushing over, suddenly stopped in the dark and chanted a dark magic spell in a low voice. On the way that the 12 cavalrymen were flying over, a large dark swirl suddenly appeared. The warhorses charged into the whirlpool, their originally lightning-fast speed suddenly becoming extremely slow. The hooves of the horses didn't make any sound on the ground. Some of the trees in the surroundings seemed to come alive at this moment as their branches danced like snakes, all of them wrapping around the slowed horses' legs. This caused the already slow warhorses to stop where they were, unable to move a single step. The great druid Caspian held a magic staff that looked like the root of an old tree and stopped on a large tree to the side. He was concentrating on releasing the magic of the druidic order, binding all 12 warhorses. Even the legs of the knights on the horses were entangled as they slumped down on their horses. "Hurry up!" The druid Caspian suddenly called out as well. "Grandpa, are you all right?" Angelica, who had been protected by the Battlefire mercenary band, suddenly cried out in joy when she saw Caspian appear. "Steal the warhorses, let's go!" Han Shua's body had already charged out. He turned around and shouted at the group of people behind him while he was in the air. Lawrence waved his hands and didn't have the time to talk to Phoebe. The people beside him, including Belinda, Johnny, Phoebe, and Candace all dashed out. Their target was the 12 warhorses and the riders that had been bound by the magic of nature. Han Shua had the Great Druid, Swordmaster Phoebe, Archmage Emily, Thunder Mage Swordsman Johnny, Fire Mage Swordsman Candace, and Lawrence's group of experts. With this group of experts, it would be an easy slaughter for the 12 ordinary riders of the Griffin Legion who had their warhorses tied up. In the span of a few breaths, the group landed in that direction and each deployed their own ultimate techniques, killing the 12 ordinary riders on the ground in an instant. They threw their corpses down and occupied their warhorses. "Let's get out of here quickly. The reason we ran here is because there are more than 100 of these riders behind us." Emily pulled on the reins as soon as she mounted her warhorse. The strange cries of the griffins in the sky grew louder and louder when Emily's words sounded. Han Shua raised his head and suddenly discovered that dozens of black dots were converging in their direction from the distance. With his sensitive ears, he could hear the chaotic sounds of hooves. It looked like this place would be surrounded in a short amount of time. "Follow me, we're charging out immediately." Han Shua pulled on the reins and turned the warhorse around, sprinting in the direction that Emily and the others had just come from. "You're crazy, there are more than 100 riders behind us." Emily was greatly frightened when she saw Han Shua turn around and suddenly cried out. Smiling wryly back at Emily, Han Shua said, "I've thought about it. That's the only way for us to quickly reach the nearest city wall. If we don't leave Valen City as soon as possible, there will be endless trouble in the future. Therefore, we must take the risk." Han Shuo hesitated no longer as soon as he finished speaking. He abruptly charged out on his warhorse, shooting towards the place where the sound of hooves had gathered. Emily only paused for a second and immediately urged her warhorse to follow behind Han Shuo. Phoebe and Candace had worked together with Han Shuo before and trusted Han Shuo's judgment. Gilbert had no objections either as he followed behind Emily. Caspian and Angelica, who were sharing the same warhorse, also shot out after a moment of hesitation. The last group of people were obviously a bit hesitant, but they only hesitated for a moment. In the end, everyone that had gathered in the inn followed the direction that Han Shuo had chosen, charging towards the place where the sound of hooves had gathered. Whether the path that Han Shuo had chosen was a path of life or death was something that they couldn't guess. Under the current circumstances, they could only hope that Han Shuo's judgment was correct. Chapter 186. It was now winter, and the cold night had frozen the low-lying puddles of water on the streets into solid ice. The chilly, knife-like winds howled sharply, as if evil spirits roaming the darkness, intimidating those who saw them. On the wide street, Han Shuo rode his horse as fast as lightning, with a group of people following closely behind. All of them had solemn expressions on their faces, already prepared to encounter great trouble. The heavy, concentrated sounds of hooves sounded from ahead of Han Shuo. Before anyone could be seen, the ferocious aura of 10,000 galloping horses had already charged over, accompanied by the heavy sounds of hooves. The demon's lair edge had long since been grasped in Han Shuo's hand. With a callous expression, Han Shuo tossed all distracting thoughts to the back of his mind, focusing his attention to a level it had never been before. Han Shuo's calm breathing and heartbeat seemed to have adjusted to an optimal state with his calmness. Even some of the injuries Han Shuo had sustained previously didn't feel any pain. When Han Shuo calmed his mind, intending to carve out a path of blood through slaughter, Han Shuo suddenly felt a bit dazed, as if he'd suddenly sunk into a strange realm. At the same time, Han Shuo's mind trembled as a profound incantation gradually became clear, reflecting itself in Han Shuo's heart. The demonic art of assimilation was an evil demonic art that could only be mastered when one reached the true demon realm. The effects of the demonic art of assimilation were reflected in the words assimilate and replenish. A demonic practitioner in the true demon realm already had a sufficiently tough demonic body and possessed a demon infant. Once one was injured, they could use the demonic art of assimilation to directly devour the enemy's flesh, blood, and soul to repair the damage to their own body. At this time, if the demon infant wanted to quickly mature, it could also rely on the demonic art of assimilation to devour the souls of its enemies. However, because there were no other cultivators of the Tao or Devil Tao in this world, there were no other demon infants or nascent souls for Han Shuo to devour. Before a living person died, the residual power of their soul would not be extinguished. At this time, he could use the demonic art of assimilation to absorb the soul of a living person and use the power of his soul to replenish his demon infant. This was currently the fastest way for Han Shuo to advance to the next realm. If a person died for a long time, the power of his soul would quickly disappear. In a very short period of time, the remaining power of his soul would completely disappear from the world. Therefore, it was completely impossible to use necromancy magic to summon wraiths to replenish his soul. This was because wraiths were products of another dimension and had died for who knew how long. The power of their souls had long since disappeared, leaving behind only the simplest traces of life. In actuality, the original demons and Yin demons that Han Shuo had refined using the original demon cave and the Yin demon cave were actually created because Han Shuo's blood essence and demonic yuan were used to bestow the power of the soul to these wraiths that no longer had the power of the soul. The original demons and Yin demons that had been created in this way only regained that power after absorbing Han Shuo's blood essence and large amounts of demonic yuan, and possessed some kind of unfathomable ability. As Han Shuo calmed his mind and focused his mind, a section of abstruse incantation magically appeared in Han Shuo's mind. When Han Shuo quickly ran through the demonic art of assimilation, in his mind, Han Shuo's body continued to gallop without hindrance. The sound of iron hooves in front of him grew heavier and denser, pounding on Han Shuo's heart like a drum. As his two sharp eyes stared ahead, Han Shuo calmly used his mind to circulate his magical yuan according to the path of the demonic art of assimilation, trying to see if there would be any effects. Contrary to Han Shuo's expectations, when Han Shuo silently circulated his magical yuan, he miraculously discovered that the demonic yuan actually flowed smoothly according to the path of the demonic art of assimilation, without any obstructions along the way. Only then did Han Shuo realize that most of the meridians of the true demon realm had been opened and expanded. The meridians of the demonic art of assimilation just so happened to be somewhat similar to the meridians of the mystical glacial spell fire. Some of the meridians were also unobstructed, causing Han Shuo's mind to immediately feel the changes in his body. When Han Shuo circulated the demonic art of assimilation and shifted the focus of his attention to his empty left hand, a thick cloud of black magical aura emanated from the center of his palm, forming a vortex that looked like a black hole. There seemed to be a strange suction force rotating within it, and a black light flashed continuously within it, emanating a frightening evil. The vortex formed from the black demonic aura in his palm wasn't large, but Han Shuo knew that he had indeed grasped the demonic art of assimilation. As for its specific effects, Han Shuo would only truly know when he tested it on someone. Those in front, stop immediately for questioning or be killed without question. At this moment, an explosive roar sounded from the front of Han Shuo. A dense group of knights rode over on their warhorses, the silver spears in their hands blossoming with dark green fighting aura, appearing quite dazzling in the darkness. Heh, I'd like to see who's going to kill who. Han Shuo laughed wildly as he squeezed his legs together, causing the warhorse to gallop even faster as he charged directly at the knight. When they were about to meet, Han Shuo had already started chanting necromancy magic in a low voice. The knights at the very front that had attempted to attack Han Shuo suddenly discovered that bone spears had appeared out of thin air and hastily raised their weapons to defend. Another spear thrusting towards him was blocked by the white bone shield that Han Shuo had formed on his left shoulder after chanting. Under the cover of necromancy magic, Han Shuo's momentum was unstoppable as he headed straight for the knight who had yelled earlier. When the demon's lair edge's sharpness clashed with the knight's spear, Han Shuo's spear was broken in two on the spot, just as Han Shuo had expected. Taking advantage of the knight's momentary daze, Han Shuo, who'd been whistling past the knight's side, suddenly reached out and grabbed the knight. Han Shuo's physique was abnormally strong. When he grabbed the knight with his left hand, he squeezed hard, causing the knight's shoulder bones to shatter. He then held the demon's lair edge in his right hand and used the thick hilt of the demon's lair edge to smash the knight's head, causing fresh blood to immediately spray out. The knight who had been screaming in pain screamed even more violently after being hit by the hilt of the demon's lair edge. However, his struggling body had no strength left, as if he'd been beaten senseless. Han Shuo's left hand that had been tightly gripping the knight's body took this opportunity to circulate the demonic art of assimilation. In a split second, the knight's blood, flesh, and life force rapidly flowed into the whirlpool in Han Shuo's left hand from his neck. A surge of strange energy suddenly surged into Han Shuo's body through the demon infant and Han Shuo's physical body. Due to the influx of this energy, his injured body miraculously and rapidly recovered, as if he'd received a miraculous elixir. Han Shuo could clearly feel that some of the ruptured blood vessels in his chest had miraculously reconnected under the nourishment of this energy. At the same time, the knight that Han Shuo had grabbed with one hand was gradually drying up and turning a grayish-brown due to the disappearance of his blood, flesh, and life force. When Han Shuo finished absorbing his flesh, a strand of his soul was also sucked away by the demon infant like a drop of water. When Han Shuo let go, a gust of cold wind blew past. The body that had lost its blood, flesh, and life force turned into dust that danced in the air. A living life had been extinguished in the blink of an eye due to the replenishment of the demonic art of assimilation, not leaving a trace in the world. As the caster, Han Shuo had absorbed the knight's blood, flesh, and life force in a short amount of time. He had recovered from his previous injuries and was now full of vigor again. The miraculous and evil nature of the demonic art of assimilation gave even Han Shuo a fright. He hadn't expected that the effects of the demonic art of assimilation would be able to absorb the knight's blood, flesh, and life force in the span of a few breaths and use it to replenish his own injured body. This was a classic method of harming others to benefit oneself, but it was in line with the true essence of a demonic practitioner. Disregarding the life and death of others, using the souls and life force of others to quickly recover and advance through slaughter and devouring was a method that demonic practitioners had long since gotten used to for thousands of years. Demon, he's a demon. The knights blocking Han Shuo's way watched with their own eyes as their leader was killed by Han Shuo in such a strange and evil manner. They were all dumbfounded. Someone in the crowd cried out in a panic. Han Shuo's evil methods had clearly exceeded the scope of their understanding, especially when Han Shuo's left hand had devoured the flesh and blood. Blood and broken bones had been splattered as Han Shuo's demonic left hand devoured the flesh and blood. It was even more difficult for them to accept. Han Shuo had already penetrated deep into this group of knights. Because the path wasn't wide enough, the knights in front of him had almost completely blocked the path. Even though Han Shuo was fast, he had no choice but to slow down a little. Han Shuo, who had been prepared to face a cruel attack, suddenly discovered that the enemies around him had all fallen into a daze. Each and every one of them looked at him with fear, and not a single one of them dared to make the first move. Each spike was several meters long and fiercely pierced towards Gilbert, who was flying low in the air. Two water dragons formed from water magic that looked like icicles also suddenly appeared and shot towards Gilbert. Gilbert, who'd been yelling excitedly, was caught off guard and was hit. His enormous body tumbled to the ground with a loud crash. After being bombarded by him, a group of knights who were still alive shot all their weapons at him, causing him to be wounded once again. "Damn it, you've injured me. I'll kill you." With a miserable howl, Gilbert let out a shrill cry and spat out flames at the two water and earth archmages in front of him. With a shake of its enormous body, it destroyed a few houses around it and flew up once again. "Let's go." One of the archmages called out calmly, and the two used the levitation spell to fly into the air, leaving in another direction. "Don't chase, let's get out of here quickly." Han Shuo saw that Gilbert was madly chasing after the two archmages and immediately yelled out to stop him from leaving. Gilbert had just made his debut and lacked battle experience. Add to that his arrogance, it was no wonder that he'd suffered at the hands of the two archmages. If it hadn't been for Gilbert, the slow-moving golem wouldn't have been able to blast open a section of the city wall when they reached it. Therefore, Han Shuo absolutely wouldn't allow Gilbert to act on his own at this time. Due to the connection of the contract, although Gilbert raised his head and yelled a few words in the air after Han Shuo's order, he still obediently continued to charge forward in the end. However, because he'd just been injured, Gilbert's flying speed was no longer fast enough. It seemed that his injuries had once again affected his physical body. The strange cries of the griffins grew closer and closer. As Han Shuo and the others fled for their lives, the group finally appeared at the city wall closest to them. The scattered soldiers of the Griffin Legion along the way were instantly disintegrated under this attack. "Blast open a section of the city wall." Han Shuo ordered once again. Gilbert and the armored golem charged towards a section of the city wall at the same time. The sturdy city wall only creaked and trembled under the tremendous impact, but didn't collapse in an instant. In order to defend Valen City against the Kasi Empire's invasion, the city walls are all made of sturdy rocks. Rather than using the Black Dragon to blast open the city walls, it's more convenient to fly over. When they arrived, Emily saw that Gilbert's blow had no immediate effect, and immediately suggested, "Don't worry, I'll be fine." Taking a look, Han Shuo made a prompt decision: those who can't fly over the city walls, immediately sit on the dark dragon's back. Those who can use levitation spells, dismount your steeds and fly over. As a dragon, he would rather die than let a warhorse that was many times lower than him climb over his head. If he did so, it would become a lifelong stain on his reputation. Gilbert was naturally no exception. Han Shuo had long since understood this taboo, which was why he'd given up on the idea of having the dark dragon take his steed with him. Angelica and the others from the Battlefire mercenary band who couldn't fly, as well as Candace and Caspian, immediately abandoned their steeds and leapt onto Gilbert's back under Han Shuo's orders. Emily, who was a magus, grabbed the fat hotel owner, Elaine, and slowly flew into the air. Third Prince Lawrence also used an expensive flying scroll and easily took the assassin Lucky into the air. His speed wasn't slow either. It looked like the flying scroll that could only be used once must have come from a Wind Grand Magus. Belinda and Johnny of the Calamity Church, whom Han Shuo hadn't paid much attention to, surprised Han Shuo when Belinda, the great alchemist, released a flattened golem the size of a kite. This golem seemed to be made of strange wood and actually carried Belinda and Johnny into the air. They weren't at their wits' end as Han Shuo had expected. It was only at the critical moment that this group of people revealed their hidden methods. It was also at this moment that Han Shuo suddenly discovered that apart from the Battlefire mercenary band and the great druid Caspian, everyone else was rich. They all had flying devices to flee for their lives. When he discovered that everyone was in position, Han Shuo's body leapt up and landed next to Phoebe. Phoebe was just about to leap onto the dark dragon's back when Han Shuo abruptly closed in and hugged her. Under Phoebe's panicked expression, Han Shuo used the art of the demonic ninth heavens, and took Phoebe's fragrant body into the air. A faint fragrance flowed into Han Shuo's nostrils because of the two's close proximity. Phoebe's breathing was a bit ragged in her panic as a strange light flickered in her eyes. She pressed her lips to Han Shuo's ear in disbelief and cried out in surprise, "How can you fly?" It wasn't just Phoebe. Even Lawrence, Candace, and the others who discovered Han Shuo's strange movements were flabbergasted. They all cried out in disbelief on the dark dragon's back, unable to understand how Han Shuo could fly. What was even more astonishing was that Han Shuo could fly at the fastest speed with Phoebe on his back. He crossed the city walls in the blink of an eye and landed on the other side, continuing to fly through the air. He hadn't used the soaring spell on the way here because it was an exhausting method. Han Shuo, who trained in magical yuan, exhausted his magical yuan, while Emily, who studied magic, exhausted her mental strength. For an archmage like Emily, using the levitation spell to fly was extremely taxing on her mental strength. Flying for a long period of time would quickly exhaust an archmage's mental strength. In addition, for an archmage like Emily, even if she used the levitation spell, her speed wouldn't be that much faster than riding a warhorse. Even for an incomparably powerful dragon, flying through the air for a long period of time was exhausting. Gilbert had already flown a great distance with the group, and he'd also been injured by the dark elves. Han Shuo hadn't told him to fly with Angelica and the others because he had a warhorse. However, the warhorse had been abandoned and the griffin riders were hot on their heels. Even for the group, flying wasn't an easy task. They could only grit their teeth and fly as fast as they could, hoping to get as far away from Valen City as possible. The pursuers didn't relax in the slightest. When Han Shuo and the others crossed the city walls and continued to fly forward, Han Shuo, who was high up in the sky, saw the grand formation of thousands of Griffin Legion riders and the dense black dots in the sky, chasing them relentlessly. It looked like Asher was truly enraged this time and wouldn't rest until he killed Han Shuo and the others. Up ahead was the Kurlan Grand Canyon that separated them from the Kasi Empire. There were mountain ranges of various sizes around the canyon, with lush vegetation and sparse human habitation. Once they entered that wide area, even Bob Asher and the others on griffins would find it harder than ascending to the heavens to find Han Shuo and the others. Therefore, once the target was confirmed, Han Shuo once again became the leader. After explaining the situation at the very front, Han Shuo held Phoebe in his arms and the black dragon carried Candace, Angelica, and the others behind him. They galloped forward with all their might. In this dangerous moment, everyone sped forward with all their might. Perhaps it was because they were competing with each other, but Lawrence and Belinda actually had excited expressions on their faces as they looked at Han Shuo in front of them. Their speed increased again and again, as if they wanted to pull Han Shuo down. With Phoebe in his arms, Han Shuo didn't know whether to laugh or cry when he saw the two chasing after him excitedly. Everyone was running for their lives right now. He didn't know what these two were up to, as if catching up to him would prove something. He didn't know what they were doing this for. You've kept both of them in the dark in this operation. You've been the commander from start to finish. These two proud and arrogant people must be a bit angry. Now that you're flying faster than them with me in your arms, they're even more furious. Phoebe looked behind her and said to Han Shuo in a soft voice. So that's the case. That doesn't seem necessary. Han Shuo was surprised and said strangely. If you weren't the one I liked, I would also want to defeat you if you kept pressing down on me in all aspects. Hee, that's human nature. Phoebe explained in a low voice and then mischievously said into Han Shuo's ear, will you defeat them? Laughing heartily, Han Shuo's heroic spirit soared to the heavens with the beauty in his arms. He even completely forgot about the danger he was in. He said in a low voice, hold me tight, I'll make them despair. Chapter 188. The art of the demonic ninth heavens that Han Shuo practiced wasn't just a bit more advanced than the levitation spells that the archmages of this world had mastered. When Han Shuo activated his magical yuan and flew through the air at full speed, his speed was unimaginably fast. Because he'd used the demonic art of assimilation to absorb the blood, flesh, and soul of a knight, Han Shuo's injuries from his clash with Asher had already healed. Now that Han Shuo was flying at full speed, he was like an arrow loosed from a bow. He flashed through the dark night and disappeared without a trace. Lawrence and Belinda were inwardly rejoicing as they saw that Han Shuo was getting closer and closer to them, when they suddenly discovered that Han Shuo's speed had doubled and he'd disappeared from their line of sight. Shaking his head with a wry smile, Lawrence's heart was filled with emotion. He'd gained a deeper understanding of Han Shuo's miraculous abilities. It was also at this moment that Lawrence made up his mind to make Han Shuo his subordinate. How was it? Han Shuo slowed down a bit after pulling away from Lawrence and Belinda, holding Phoebe in his arms as he spoke. How did you do it? Phoebe's voice was filled with surprise. Heh, don't worry about that. I can fly through the air anyways, but it's not because of necromancy magic. Han Shuo smiled faintly as he explained. The sky had brightened after a night of battle and pursuit. As the sun rose, the Kurlan Grand Canyon was bathed in the morning light and was covered in silver. Looking back, Han Shuo discovered that Dark Dragon Gilbert, Emily, and Belinda were gradually approaching. After waiting for a while, when they flew towards Han Shuo saw a cluster of black dots in the distance. Judging from the distance, Han Shuo discovered that his group had maintained an ideal distance from the Griffin Legion. Seeing that the Kurlan Grand Canyon was already in sight, Han Shuo encouraged everyone, as long as we enter the Grand Canyon, the Griffin Knights won't be able to find us thanks to the complicated terrain and the thick, snowy trees. There was no need for Han Shuo to say anything. Everyone knew what to do at this time. Everyone was shaken, and with even more enthusiasm, they charged forward with all their might. As expected, they landed in the Kurlan Grand Canyon before the Griffin Knights could reach them. The Kurlan Grand Canyon was vast, with mountains, rivers, and lakes in great numbers. It was located between the Lancelot Empire, the Kasi Empire, and the Orc tribes. Past the Kurlan Grand Canyon, heading west was where the orcs lived. Heading north was the border of the Kasi Empire. Heading south for a few days, one could reach the city of Zajoski in the southwest of the empire. The orc tribes of the Lancelot Empire, Kasi Empire, and Kasi Empire surrounded the Kurland Grand Canyon in a triangular shape. Therefore, this place didn't belong to any of the countries. Whenever war broke out, the Grand Canyon could become a place where troops could be stationed or engaged in battle. Due to the special terrain, there were also some towns in this place, with people from the Lancelot Empire, the Kasi Empire, and the orc tribes residing within. They would make use of this special terrain to conduct transactions that would benefit both sides. Before war broke out, merchants and adventurers from the three countries could interact amicably in these towns. Of course, as the escapees, Han Shua's group didn't plan on hiding in these towns. Everyone descended from the sky as soon as they entered the Kurland Grand Canyon. Phoebe, who'd been out doing business for many years, and Emily, who'd been out on missions, immediately took over Han Shua's command. The two girls discussed briefly and decided on a direction to head in. The thick snow on the trees around them almost covered the sky. For Han Shua's group, this place was very suitable for hiding. As long as they leaned against a random tree, the Griffin Knights circling in the sky wouldn't be able to find them. Therefore, after everyone descended from the sky, they deliberately walked towards places with lush vegetation as they treaded on the snow. It was obviously inconvenient for Han Shua to carry Phoebe at this time, so he tugged at Phoebe and gestured for her to leave his embrace. As a sword master, Phoebe first squirmed in Han Shua's embrace, seemingly greedy for the warmth emanating from Han Shua's body. However, when she discovered that everyone was walking on foot and that Candace was looking at her with a smile that wasn't quite a smile, she blushed and hurriedly left Han Shua's embrace. As Casters, Emily, Angelica, and the others were all wrapped in thick, flesh-colored coats. After flying through the night and being buffeted by the frigid wind for so long, they were all shivering from the cold. Their footsteps slowed down a bit at this time. Seeing that Emily's beautiful face was a bit pale from the cold, Han Shua felt a bit of pain in his heart. He looked left and right and suddenly suggested, "We've already entered the Kurland Grand Canyon anyways. There are trees blocking the sky here and it'll be hard for the Griffin Legion to find us. I see that everyone is a bit tired after a busy day. It's not wise for us to continue on our way now. Why don't we find a hidden place to rest first?" Everyone readily agreed after Han Shua's words. Phoebe's bright eyes spun as she suddenly thought of something. She turned and said to Han Shua, "I've been here a few times and I remember that there's a hidden cave nearby. I've stored some goods there before, we can rest there. Alright, we can look around. It'd be best if we can find this place." Han Shua was overjoyed and said with a smile. Phoebe then furrowed her brow in thought and pointed in a direction. She said, "If I remember correctly, it should be there. Let's go take a look." When the group approached, they discovered that apart from a thick layer of snow, there were no traces of a cave. Phoebe was startled for a moment and then said with certainty, "It should be here. It looks like the entrance to the cave has been blocked by snow. We'll know if we dig a bit." "Then what are we waiting for?" Lawrence called out briskly. It looked like he trusted this junior sister quite a bit. He took out his long sword and stabbed fiercely at the place Phoebe was pointing at. The mages and Belinda all seemed to want to come over and help when they saw that Lawrence had made his move. Han Shua suddenly called out at this moment, "Slow down, don't use any magic. We should be careful and move the snow away from the cave entrance. This way, we won't leave any obvious traces when we enter. Even if the Griffin Legion gives up on the Griffins and comes down to search, they'll find it hard to find us." Everyone immediately agreed after Han Shua's words. Han Shua, Lawrence, and Phoebe then carefully dug, moving large chunks of snow away. "It's here all right, heh heh." Phoebe stirred the long sword in her hand after moving away a large patch of snow and suddenly cried out in surprise. Han Shua and Lawrence then looked at each other and moved away the somewhat thick snow that had gathered at the entrance of the cave, revealing a pitch-black cave entrance. Looking inside, Han Shua discovered that the space inside was as wide as a basketball court. It looked like it could accommodate everyone on this side. Go in, one by one. Don't expand the entrance anymore, or else it'll be hard to hide. Han Shua said and moved his body away from the cave entrance. Little elf Angelica, who'd long since been shivering from the cold, breathed out hot air and was the first to walk in. Emily, Candace, and the others all entered the cave one by one. After Phoebe and Lawrence went in as well, Han Shua found some branches and placed them in the cave. He then casually picked up some of the snow that had just been pushed away and sprayed some onto it. When Han Shua felt that it was sufficiently hidden, he carefully observed the surroundings and walked into the depths of the cave. A bonfire had already been lit at the entrance of the cave after a while, and a warm wave of heat suddenly spread into the cave. The originally cold cave instantly became a warm zone. With the existence of space rings, mages would always bring some dry firewood in the cold winter, in case they needed to keep warm. Soft blankets from the other tents were also taken out by the various factions and placed next to the bonfire. The mages then comfortably entered their own heating equipment to obtain warmth. Emily and Caspian's somewhat stiff limbs slowly relaxed from the warmth of the bonfire. Sighing in contentment, Emily slowly stood up and walked towards the door. I'm going to set up a concealment boundary at the entrance of the cave to prevent this place from being discovered. As Emily did so, Caspian also stood up and walked towards the entrance of the cave with Emily. He said, I'll go help her as well. When Emily and Caspian got up to set up the boundary at the entrance of the cave, Belinda and Johnny of the Calamity Church had obviously uneasy expressions on their faces. Their eyes flickered as they looked at the entrance of the cave with great wariness, as if they were afraid that Emily and Caspian would do something to the entrance of the cave. This was indeed the case. Han Shua had been walking over, but when he saw Emily and Caspian go over to set up the entrance of the cave, he unintentionally turned his head and immediately understood that Emily and Caspian were indeed on guard and had really done something to the entrance of the cave. Miss Belinda, you should pay us the commission you owe me. Just as Han Shua was feeling astonished, Candace was already staring at Belinda with a displeased expression as she spoke coldly. Everyone had been at peace with each other before because they had a common enemy. The Griffin Legion was hot on their heels and they couldn't relax for even a moment, which was why they hadn't settled their debts with each other. Now that the threat of the Griffin Legion was temporarily gone, the already hostile group immediately began to oppose each other. You're already very lucky to be alive right now. I'm sorry, but our Calamity Church has never had the tradition of paying commission. Belinda's voice was still quite gentle as she flicked a glance at Candace and responded nonchalantly. Clang! Belinda unsheathed the broadsword on her back and glared angrily at Belinda. I escorted you all the way to Valen City and not only did I not receive a single gold coin in commission, you even almost killed me. It looks like it's time for us to settle our debts. If you plan on making a move, I think you'll regret it. Belinda was obviously unafraid of Candace's threats. She turned to look at Johnny and took out a scroll that contained a golem in the form of a three-eyed evil god. This cave is only 3 meters tall, I don't believe that your armored golem will be of any use. Candace laughed coldly and walked towards Belinda, looking like she was about to make a move. Phoebe had been standing next to Han Shua and was like a sister to Candace. When she saw that Candace was about to make a move, she unsheathed her longsword without hesitation and a milky white fighting aura suddenly flared up from it. Belinda's previously disdainful expression suddenly brightened when she saw the milky white fighting aura blossom from Phoebe's longsword. She seemed a bit surprised. Humph, you're courting death. The wound on Johnny's chest had been treated and was now bandaged with a piece of gauze. Lightning crackled as he raised his sword, and his aura wasn't the slightest bit weaker than Phoebe's. Give them the commission, this is what you should pay. Otherwise, only death awaits you. Han Shua quickly recognized the situation and walked to Phoebe's side with a callous expression, snorting coldly as he stared at Belinda. Gilbert cackled oddly as he cracked his knuckles. Caspian and those of the Battlefire mercenary band also stood next to Candace. It looked like they would immediately make a move if Belinda didn't back down. Although Belinda's voice was soft, her temper was quite stubborn. She didn't show any signs of timidity at this moment and seemed to be prepared to fight head-on. Now doesn't seem to be the time for internal strife. Heh heh, Miss Candace, how much money do they owe you? I'll help them pay it. Let's not argue about this matter for now, okay? Lawrence suddenly stood up at this moment and smiled to smooth things over, contrary to everyone's expectations. Chapter 189. Shaking her head, Candace refused Lawrence's suggestion and looked resolutely at Belinda, exclaiming, "This isn't just a matter of money." Candace obviously held the upper hand in the current situation. With the help of Han Shua and the others, Belinda and Johnny wouldn't be able to gain any advantage at all. It could be seen from Belinda and Johnny's attire and weapons that the Calamity Church didn't lack money. Belinda only needed to pay a few gold coins to quell Candace's anger, but she was stubborn to the point of being a bit baffling. Those of the Calamity Church aren't people that you can threaten. Johnny, who was already injured, had a scar on his face that looked even more ferocious because of his angry expression. The long sword in his hand that flickered with the power of thunder and lightning emitted a dazzling electric light. Just as Han Shua was about to speak, Johnny's body moved quickly and he suddenly charged at Han Shua, his face full of murderous intent. The long sword in his hand that carried the power of thunder and lightning was like an electric dragon in his hand, bursting with a terrifying power of thunder and lightning, illuminating the dimly lit cave. Watch out! Johnny's sudden attack caused Phoebe, Emily and the others to be greatly shocked and couldn't help but cry out in warning. A pile of white bones suddenly gathered in midair, forming a white bone shield in an instant, blocking the front of the lightning longsword. Two bone spears shot out and collided with Johnny's lightning longsword before the white bone shield had formed. Creak creak, the bone spear exploded and sparks flew. Under the impact of Johnny's momentum, the lightning longsword bombarded the white bone shield with a bang. In an instant, the bone fragments on the white bone shield immediately broke into chunks. Johnny's sword had been obstructed twice, but it still persisted in its attempt to stab Han Shua to death. The demon's lair edge finally whistled out of its sheath as a cold glint flashed in Han Shua's hand. Han Shua gave a muffled grunt as his body stumbled back a few steps. The lightning on Johnny's longsword suddenly flickered and then extinguished. Johnny's momentum also slowed at this moment. When he was about to make another move, Caspian, Emily, Phoebe, and the others were already standing next to Han Shua, glaring angrily at him. It doesn't seem that I'm your enemy. Having steadied himself, Han Shua first circulated the magical yuan through his body and confirmed that there were no major injuries. He then focused his cold gaze on Johnny and spoke faintly. You deceived us in the operation against Bob Asher this time and used us as cannon fodder. Apart from helping us send a few people away, you didn't do anything at all. Now that the matter has passed, don't pretend that we don't know what you're planning. You deserve to die the most. Johnny's expression was savage as he looked coldly at Han Shua. As the chief of the Griffin Legion, whether or not Han Shua and Emily had concrete evidence, they didn't have the right to kill Asher, much less assassinate him. If Han Shua and Emily had joined forces with the Calamity Church to kill Asher, then the two of them would certainly suffer the consequences in the Dark Mantle. In addition, Han Shua, who was well aware of Asher's strength, also understood that killing Asher in Valen City wasn't something that they could do. Only religious fanatics would act recklessly without regard for their own lives. Nodding, Han Shua smiled faintly and said, "Since things have been made clear, then don't blame me for burning the bridge after crossing it. You've already made a move against me, so don't blame me for not holding back." Han Shua turned his head to look at the wry-smiling Lawrence after saying this and said with a smile, "You wouldn't be thinking of helping them now, would you?" Spreading his hands, Lawrence took a few steps back and said with a wry smile, "I was originally very interested in the Calamity Church's golem and wanted to obtain the manufacturing methods of the golem through friendly means. But now I think that's not quite possible." Lawrence's words confirmed Han Shua's previous guess. Lawrence was someone who only cared about his own matters, and yet he'd suddenly extended a helping hand to Belinda and Bob. He had other plans indeed. Lawrence's words now meant that he was standing on Han Shua and Phoebe's side. Nodding, Han Shua smiled faintly at Lawrence and said, "Many thanks. Do you think that you've won against us for sure?" Belinda, who was standing behind Johnny, still had a calm expression on her face. She only spoke at this moment and reached out to take out the item that sealed the golem, preparing to make her move. "Heh, you won't have the chance." Han Shua laughed and used the demon infant to communicate with a drop of blood essence hidden in Belinda's body. With a thought, the cold air contained within the blood essence entered Belinda's body. She felt her neck go numb and she fainted backwards. What did you do to her?" Johnny was greatly startled by Belinda's sudden collapse. He looked at Han Shua with a bit of panic. "She'll live, but there's no need for you to exist. It's too dangerous to keep you alive." Han Shua snorted coldly and suddenly opened his mouth to chant a necromancy spell. A hate warrior appeared out of thin air and 3 zombie warriors blocked Han Shua's path. Johnny immediately knew that Belinda wouldn't be able to help him when he saw that the situation had developed to this point. He hesitated slightly and immediately turned to flee, attempting to leave through the only hole. Emily and Caspian suddenly started chanting magic incantations. Just as Johnny's body landed at the entrance of the cave, several thick tree roots agilely entangled him, and a cloud of black gas floated towards him. "You can't escape." Emily giggled and chanted another spell. The black gas seemed to be some sort of binding as Johnny's body suddenly stiffened as soon as it neared him. The nimble tree branches then seized the opportunity to entangle his body. Johnny was a thunder and lightning demon swordmaster all right. He was still able to move after being restrained so many times. He raised the long sword in his hand with great difficulty, planning to chop off the tree branches that bound his body. However, the 3 zombies and the hate warrior had already closed in on him at this moment. A bolt of lightning flashed as the long sword sliced through the air, hitting the first 2 zombie warriors. Electricity abruptly invaded the bodies of the 2 zombie warriors, and when the long sword sliced through the air, the 2 zombie warriors suddenly froze in place and didn't move again. Chapter 190. A bright crescent moon hung high in the sky as its cold moonlight sprinkled down, illuminating the world wrapped in silver and making the night quite bright. The surroundings were exceedingly quiet, without the slightest sound. It wasn't just humans and beasts that didn't want to leave their caves in the cold winter night. Even some small insects seemed unwilling to leave their caves. When the group walked out of the cave, they immediately felt that the temperature outside was much colder than in the cave. Even though they'd been mentally prepared, they still couldn't help but tighten their thick clothes and exhale lightly. "There's no time to lose. I think it's best if we leave as soon as possible and return to the Empire." Han Shua looked around at the group and spoke lowly. It was unknown if Griffin Legion Commander Asher had discovered that the important items in the secret room had been stolen after the commotion. When he returned to Valen City with no results from this search, he'd discover the problem with the secret room sooner or later. At that time, he'd definitely be driven to desperate action. Therefore, Han Shua and Emily had to deliver the information they'd obtained to the senior executives of the Dark Mantle as soon as possible, so that they could deal with Asher as soon as possible and prevent him from stirring up trouble. There are a few ungoverned towns in the vast area of the Kurlan Grand Canyon. The Dark Mantle has a few strongholds here, and the largest stronghold has a magical device that can contact the senior executives of the Dark Mantle. Brian and I need to get there as soon as possible. We're in very little danger now, so it looks like it's time to part ways. Emily mused for a moment and then suggested with a smile. When I entered Elaine's hotel, the merchant company escorting the goods with me had already left Valen City, so I'm working alone now. I've already told them that nothing will happen to the merchant company for now. I'll return to the Empire with Brian. Phoebe stood beside Han Shoa and expressed her stance. Caspian and Lawrence thought about it for a moment and both expressed their intention to part ways with Han Shoa. Caspian solemnly expressed his thanks to Han Shoa, and Lawrence's gaze roamed over Belinda, who had been captured by Emily. He then said, "Brian, if you can get the method to refine a golem from her, I'm willing to pay a great price for it." Nodding his head, Han Shoa expressed his understanding and said with a smile, "I will ask her, but I advise you not to have too much hope. I think that even if you have the method to refine puppets, you can't mass-produce them. Otherwise, with the Calamity Church's financial resources, they would have long since formed an army of puppets." Lawrence stared blankly at Han Shoa's words, then opened his mouth again to say, "Even if you can refine one or two, it would be of great help to me." "All right, I'll try my best." Seeing that Lawrence still hadn't given up, Han Shoa said helplessly, "Big bad guy, will we meet again?" On the other side, Angelica suddenly stared at Han Shoa and said crisply as Caspian was about to leave. Shrugging his shoulders, Han Shoa said dashingly, "I think so. We've already met twice in such a short period of time. We're quite fated. All right, thank you again. If you have the chance in the future, come visit the Elven tribe in the Dark Forest. Angelica will treat you well." Caspian bowed to Han Shoa and said with a smile. Lawrence and the others didn't linger when Caspian and Angelica left, walking in the opposite direction from Caspian and Angelica. After Caspian and Angelica disappeared, Han Shoa thought that if Caspian and Angelica found out that he was the leader of the Dark Forest Troll, the two of them would hate Han Shoa to a great extent. It was best not to visit the Elven tribe. Senior Swordsman Davis of the Battlefire Mercenary Band felt dejected after Angelica's departure. This valiant swordsman's gaze was still fixed in the direction that Angelica had disappeared in, lost in thought. "Candace, how much does this Belinda owe you? I'll pay it for you. We still have a use for her, we can't give her to you." Emily looked at Candace at this moment and took out her crystal card, seeming to want to pay Candace. "Forget it, Sister Emily, we don't lack these gold coins. Let's just consider this mission a failure, it's no big deal." Candace hurriedly declined when she saw that Emily was about to pay. She then looked at the mercenaries behind her and said to Emily and Phoebe, all right, we need to leave as well. We still need to continue the mission when we return." Candace didn't wait for Emily to pay the gold coins after she'd finished speaking and quickly fled with the mercenaries. Because they couldn't fly and Han Shoa and the others were in a hurry to leave, Emily told Elaine the address and had her take Belinda there. Because Han Shoa had released the cold air, Belinda wouldn't wake up for a while without Han Shoa's help, so Emily and Han Shoa didn't need to worry about Elaine's safety. After Elaine grabbed Belinda and left, only Han Shoa, Emily, Phoebe, and the strangely quiet dark dragon Gilbert were left in front of the cave. Why are you so quiet all of a sudden?" Han Shoa finally remembered that Gilbert hadn't made a fuss in a long time and couldn't help but ask in surprise. Gilbert had been standing there silently with his eyes closed when he heard Han Shoa's question. He immediately opened his eyes with a long face and said, "What a disloyal master, I've been injured along the way and have been recuperating whenever I have the time. Why have you only thought of me now?" Han Shoa finally remembered that the attacks of the two archmages and a group of knights had hit him when they charged out of Valen City. He'd then flown for so long with a group of old and weak soldiers on his back. No wonder he'd suddenly become so quiet. "Don't worry, your skin's thick anyways." Han Shoa chuckled naughtily and thought for a moment, "How about this, You get the hell back home first and I'll take you out after you've recovered. I've only been out for a few days and you're chasing me back again. Gilbert immediately yelled loudly when he heard that Han Shuo wanted him to return to the cemetery of death. Go, be a good boy or I'll show you what's coming. Now that I'm with two beauties, it'll be so inconvenient to bring you along, not to mention that you're injured. Han Shuo laughed naughtily as he took out his magic wand and set up a matrix. He grabbed Gilbert's shoulder as he yelled and kicked him in regardless of whether he was willing or not. His mental strength moved and the matrix was immediately activated. Gilbert also disappeared without a trace. Without the Eye of Darkness, even Gilbert wouldn't be able to walk out of the cemetery of death. Therefore, Han Shuo didn't have to worry about Gilbert making trouble after sending him in. Off to the side, Phoebe stared in astonishment at the miniature magical matrix that Han Shuo had set up and directly sent Gilbert to some unknown place. She couldn't help but exclaim softly, her bright eyes looking at Han Shuo with even more astonishment. Heh heh, it's just a transportation matrix, there's nothing strange about it. Let's go, we can also leave this place. Han Shuo chuckled lightly and put the items into his space ring, urging Emily and Phoebe to leave. Traveling with the two beauties wasn't a happy thing. The originally cold and aloof Phoebe had been intentionally acting very intimate with Han Shuo along the way. This made Emily, who already had an intimate relationship with Han Shuo, look at Han Shuo with a bit of bitterness. As a mage, Emily was still shivering in the cold night even though she was wrapped in thick fur clothing, making Han Shuo's heart ache. However, perhaps to avoid arousing suspicion, Emily purposefully kept a distance from Han Shuo, as if afraid that Phoebe would discover her relationship with Han Shuo. Han Shuo carried Phoebe and flew through the air along the way, while Emily expended her mental strength to use the levitation spell to fly close to the ground. However, as an archmage, Emily expended her mental strength to use the levitation spell to fly for a limited amount of time. Han Shuo had already discovered that Emily's lips were a bit pale when it was almost midnight. Han Shuo, who was flying with Phoebe in his arms, suddenly increased his speed and landed next to Emily. He said, "I'll fly with two people, there won't be any problems." Regardless of whether Phoebe agreed or not, Han Shuo reached out and wrapped his arms around Emily's soft waist as soon as he'd finished speaking. He continued to fly through the air with Phoebe in his right hand and Emily in his left. He also silently circulated his magical yuan, sending warm heat into Emily's cold body. Emily struggled a bit after being embraced by Han Shuo's left hand, attempting to leave Han Shuo's embrace. However, Han Shuo held her firmly in place, making it impossible for her to move at all. When Emily turned her head to look at Han Shuo, she discovered the heartache and determination in Han Shuo's eyes. She couldn't help but feel a sweetness in her heart. Whether it was because of the heat entering her body or some other reason, Emily felt her cold body heat up in an instant. The previous coldness faded in an instant, and her entire being seemed to be enveloped in warmth. "I see that you seem to be very familiar with the way you're holding her." At this moment, Phoebe's cherry lips moved to Han Shuo's ear and she spoke softly with a hint of jealousy. She didn't seem to be afraid that Emily would hear her words. "We need to get to the Dark Mantle's location as soon as possible. There will be major problems if we're late, so I'll fly with you too. This is the fastest way." Han Shuo's expression was indifferent, and he didn't express anything because of Phoebe's words. They were silent the rest of the way. Han Shuo circulated the art of the demonic ninth heavens to its limits, and split out an extra portion of magical yuan to warm Emily's body. He followed Emily's directions as fast as lightning and shot towards a mountain range in the Kurlan region. Even with Han Shuo's magical yuan, he had to use a portion of it to warm Emily while circulating the art of the demonic ninth heavens to fly. This enormous consumption was a bit hard to bear. By the second half of the night, Han Shuo was already panting and sweating. "Take a rest, look how tired you are." Although Phoebe had been a bit jealous just now, her feelings for Han Shuo were sincere. She couldn't help but speak with heartache when she saw Han Shuo sweat. On the other side, Emily was also feeling heartache. Right now, Han Shuo only wanted to get to that place as soon as possible and finish this mission as soon as possible. After flying for over an hour and passing through two small valleys, Han Shuo discovered a large valley in the distance. The sun was already high in the sky at this time. The vicinity of the large valley wasn't covered in thick snow, and the ground was clean and tidy. Low buildings of various styles were scattered in rows on the small mountain, Tanai. On the streets that had been cleaned up, humans, orcs, and elves with different appearances and different clothing walked out of the buildings they lived in. "We're almost there, let's go on foot." Behind him, Emily could easily see the general scenery in the distance under the illumination of the sun. Her voice sounded a little cheerful. This place was somewhat similar to the town of Droll, but a bit more complicated. Although they both had inns and places to indulge, the adventurers and merchants in the town were basically all from the Lancelot Empire. In addition, the town of Droll was also managed by Lancelot Empire soldiers. However, the adventurers and merchants in this place weren't only from the Lancelot Empire, but also from the Kasi Empire and the Orc tribes. There were also people from even further countries, or some of the rare races that lived in the Kurlan Grand Canyon. Of course, such an ungoverned place naturally didn't belong to any single country. In Tanai of the Sunshine Valley, the greatest power is the Keeper of Order. They're in charge of protecting the rights and interests of the traders and preventing the invasion of bandits. All along, the three countries here have their own powers. When one side is so strong that the other two don't have any objections, this power will take over the order here and collect huge fees from the merchants and adventurers. They're in charge of everything here. Of course, this power isn't unchanging. If one side can prove that they're superior and can suppress the other two, then the Keeper of Order will change. Currently, the Keeper of Order here is the Cairo mercenary band from the Kasi Empire. Emily and Han Shuo descended from the sky and slowly explained to Han Shuo as they walked towards the Valley of Sunshine. If the Keepers of Order here serve their own country, then wouldn't that infringe on the rights and interests of the adventurers and merchants from other countries? Han Shuo thought for a moment and asked in astonishment. "Don't worry, no matter which country they came from, as long as they become the Keepers of Order here, they absolutely won't seek benefits for their country. Otherwise, they'll be ostracized by all the adventurers and merchants and won't have the chance to regain their power here. There are no national boundaries within the Kingdom of Sunshine. Not participating in the conflicts between countries is the first iron rule that the Keepers of Order must follow." Emily laughed lightly and explained to Han Shuo. Nodding, Han Shuo indicated that he understood and thought that this place was quite interesting. People from different countries all came here for their own selfish motives. Large transactions between the three countries would surely allow the Keepers of Order here to earn a considerable amount of gold coins. Han Shuo naturally wasn't too clear on these common-sense rules. Along the way, Emily and Phoebe explained to Han Shuo one by one. Han Shuo listened very carefully. When they arrived at the management office of the Valley of Sunshine, they discovered that tall iron fences had been set up. A few knights in ash-brown armor guarded the iron fences, all of them wearing grave and stern expressions. From Emily and Phoebe's conversation, Han Shuo knew that these people were from the Cairo mercenary band from the Kasi Empire. This mercenary band had an astonishing strength of 2,000 to 3,000 people. There were experts of all professions within the band. They trained constantly and were even stronger than the regular army of an ordinary country. They had their own strict system and reasonable division of professions. In the year or so since they'd taken over the Valley of Sunshine, they'd fended off many bandits' attacks and displayed a combat strength that satisfied the Tanai merchants and adventurers. "Where are you from?" Do you have a pass? Do you need to apply for it now? A tall and rather handsome knight stood by the iron fences. He was exceedingly courteous when he saw Emily and Phoebe walk over. He had a charming smile on his lips as he asked in a gentle voice. I'm from the Buzzed Merchant Guild. These two are with me. This is my pass. Phoebe's expression was cold and arrogant. She took out a pass from her space ring and indifferently handed it over. This mature knight respectfully reached out to receive Phoebe's pass. After a moment of inspection, he smiled and handed it back to Phoebe. He said courteously, "No problem. The Valley of Sunshine welcomes your arrival. The Cairo Mercenary Band will be responsible for the safety of your lives and property." She casually took out a bag of gold coins and threw it on a round table in the iron fences. Phoebe's expression was as cold and inhuman as ever when she was dealing with outsiders. She said faintly, "This is the fee we should pay." Phoebe turned to look at Han Shuo as soon as she'd finished speaking. She extended a slender hand and took Han Shuo's arm. The arrogance on her face faded as she smiled sweetly. "Let's go, we can go in now." A stunning beauty like Phoebe didn't care about the men around her at all. She'd put on a haughty and unapproachable attitude and then suddenly changed her attitude to a slightly fawning smile at Han Shuo. This immediately caused the Cairo mercenaries to look at Han Shuo with envious expressions. However, when they saw the little skull that Han Shuo was holding, a strange expression appeared on their faces. However, they didn't say anything. It seemed that they'd met many strange people. There was nothing wrong with an adventurer like Han Shuo who'd brought a dark creature with him. Everyone had their own vanity. Han Shuo also felt that he'd gained quite a bit of face when these people looked at him with such envious gazes. He inwardly thought that this little wench Phoebe had really given him face. "Let's go, you bastard." Emily didn't know what he was thinking when she saw Han Shuo's smiling face, but his footsteps paused. She couldn't help but roll her eyes at him and give him a gentle push from behind. Laughing heartily, Han Shuo passed through the iron fences under the envious gazes of the mercenaries and walked straight into the depths of the Valley of Sunshine. When Han Shuo looked at her, she couldn't help but explain, "Why is it this shop? It's not the first time I've come to the Valley of Sunshine, but I've never seen this shop open. I think that the person inside isn't willing to sell anything, otherwise they wouldn't close the door." It was indeed as Han Shuo had said. Every shop in the Valley of Sunshine wished for everyone to enter, but this shop's door was actually covered up, as if no one lived inside. It was a bit out of place on the bustling street. Suddenly, Little Skull, who had been standing there all this time, walked towards the shop without Han Shuo's orders. He reached out his hand and pushed the door open. To Han Shuo's surprise, a soft creak sounded as the seemingly tightly shut door suddenly swung open, revealing a cobblestone walkway. Phoebe started and said hesitantly, "Entering someone else's shop without permission is against the rules of the Valley of Sunshine. Is there someone inside?" "There's someone inside." Han Shuo nodded and followed Little Skull inside. He suddenly called out, wanting to see if there was anyone inside. Unfortunately, Han Shuo didn't hear any response even after calling out a few times. Little Skull naturally didn't know any rules and directly walked deeper into the shop. Spreading his hands at Phoebe, Han Shuo said, "There's no one here anyways, it shouldn't matter if we go in and take a look." Han Shuo then turned around and closed the door that Little Skull had pushed open. He gave Phoebe a meaningful glance and grabbed Phoebe's little hand as they walked inside. After passing through the hallway, Little Skull went straight to the backyard where there was a deep, circular well. Little Skull stood next to the well after coming over and poked his head in to look inside. No one knew what he was looking at. When Han Shuo and Emily came over, Han Shuo suddenly felt that there seemed to be a cold, evil presence within the well, as if some kind of powerful demon existed within. "Something's wrong, the temperature here is too low, even I feel a bit cold. Phoebe's body suddenly trembled as she looked at Han Shuo. That's right, this is a place of extreme water, a place that I must refine into a water elite zombie. The dense water chi within has been absorbed by the vengeful spirits and has most likely formed water demons. Han Shuo's face was filled with ecstasy as he spoke excitedly. Han Shuo drew closer and felt with his heart. He could clearly feel the dense water chi within, as well as two cold and sinister presences. This made Han Shuo understand that the water element within had been absorbed by the vengeful spirits and formed into two water demons. Brian, I should be the one thanking you. Not only had the danger of the blood-water demons caused Phoebe to experience life and death, even Han Shuo had almost been scared out of his wits. After the great calamity, the two looked at each other and both felt a sense of appreciation for what they had now. Under the light of the setting sun, Phoebe's beautiful face looked even more beautiful. Her bright eyes sparkled with light, making Han Shuo want to lose himself in them. Tightening his grip, Han Shuo pulled Phoebe into his arms. Feeling Phoebe's body trembled slightly in close contact, Han Shuo's heart was filled with happiness. Before he'd come to this world, Han Shuo had been an ordinary person with evil intentions but no guts. His personality was kind but a bit cowardly. He hadn't done anything to be proud of in his 20 years of life, nor had he ever had a woman. He'd lived in mediocrity for 20 years. But under Chu Kanglin's scheme, he brought the memories of the demonic arts to this strange world. In a short period of time, Han Shuo had obtained great power, obtained a considerable sum of money, and had already won the hearts of two stunning beauties. The vicissitudes of life were always so unexpected. The extravagant hope that he'd only dared to imagine 20 years ago was quickly realized in such a short amount of time. This caused a feeling of disbelief to rise in Han Shuo's heart. Sometimes, Han Shuo even felt that everything that was happening now was like an unreal dream. However, the repeated dangers and pain reminded him that this wasn't an illusion. All right, I think Emily must still be waiting for us. Let's hurry over. Sighing with emotion, Han Shuo couldn't help but speak softly to Phoebe as he watched the sunset glow fade away. The sky had already darkened. Seeming to greatly enjoy this moment of peace and tenderness, Phoebe gave a light and gently allowed Han Shuo to hold her soft little hand. The two walked shoulder to shoulder towards the location they'd agreed upon with Emily. Before long, Han Shuo and Phoebe appeared in front of the shop. Because the sky was already dark, there weren't any customers inside. When Han Shuo had just walked inside, a hale and hearty old man chuckled and asked, "Are you Lord Brian?" "I wouldn't dare call you Lord. You can just call me Brian." Han Shuo humbly bowed towards the old man and took out his dark mantle identity medallion, handing it to the old man with both hands. The old man took Han Shuo's iron medallion and glanced at it, returning it to Han Shuo with a smile. He then said a bit apologetically to Phoebe, "I'm sorry Miss Phoebe, please wait here for a moment. The dark mantle has its rules. Apart from internal personnel, outsiders are not allowed inside." As the hand of darkness of Lancelot Empire, the dark mantle naturally had rules that everyone had to abide by. As an outsider, Phoebe being able to come together with Han Shuo was already an exception. Naturally, Phoebe couldn't be allowed inside. Phoebe didn't maintain her usual cold arrogance towards such a polite and amiable old man. "Oh right, when will Elaine and Belinda get here?" Han Shuo couldn't help but secretly rejoice for Chester when he heard that he'd received a reward as well. He then suddenly thought of Elaine and Belinda and couldn't help but ask. "I almost forgot if you didn't mention it. Belinda is an unexpected gain. If we send her to the Dark Mantle headquarters and interrogate the torture experts there, we'll be able to learn a lot about the Calamity Church. When the time comes, according to the value of the information from her mouth, we will be able to receive additional rewards. Emily giggled as she spoke joyfully. Oh right, after advancing from a 3-star dark star to a 1-month dark moon, what kind of treatment can I enjoy? Han Shuo thought for a bit and immediately asked. This was what he should be most concerned about at the moment. First, the amount of gold coins you receive every month will increase from 70 to 150. Of course, I don't think you'll care about these gold coins. Apart from this, you can use your current authority to obtain all kinds of information on the corresponding identities in every Dark Mantle stronghold. You can now use all the transportation matrices in every city of the Lancelot Empire without paying any gold coins. You can use your current status in any military organization in every city to mobilize no more than 100 soldiers to assist you in battle under special circumstances. Also, Han Shuo finally discovered after Emily's tireless explanation that all aspects of treatment had greatly improved after advancing from Dark Star to Dark Moon. The Dark Moon envoys already had so many privileges. The higher-ranked Dark Sun envoys and the 3 heavyweights of the Dark Mantle naturally enjoyed even more privileges. No wonder so many people wished to grasp power. It looked like this was indeed a good thing. Han Shuo couldn't help but sigh emotionally. All sorts of strange goods could be found here. When Han Shuo and Phoebe searched patiently, they indeed found quite a few materials they needed. The noon sun shone down on the Valley of Sunshine, bathing the entire valley in sunlight. It was so warm that it made people feel very comfortable. Walking out of a shop, Phoebe rubbed her lower abdomen and smiled sweetly at Han Shuo. I'm a bit hungry. Let's find a place to get something to eat first. You're familiar with this place. Just take me to where there's delicious food. Han Shuo replied with a smile. It was said that when a demonic arts practitioner reached a certain level, they could live for hundreds of years without eating or drinking. They didn't need to use grains to nourish their body. However, Han Shuo hadn't reached this level yet. Besides, food was also a form of enjoyment for Han Shuo, apart from replenishing his body's energy. Phoebe led the way in front and the two walked into a small shop. A few dwarves about 1 meter tall walked out and politely welcomed Han Shuo and Phoebe to their seats. This shop wasn't very big, and the decorations inside weren't luxurious either. There were only a few simple chairs, but it was packed with people. A few merchants wearing luxurious fur coats and sparkling diamond rings on their fingers sat lazily on the tables and chairs that weren't very spacious, wolfing down the food on their plates without a care for their image. Han Shuo and Phoebe sat down at a table for 2 by the window. Phoebe didn't ask for Han Shuo's opinion, and directly instructed a dwarf next to her, bring the best food in the shop. The dwarf smiled faintly and bowed courteously, then quickly left Phoebe and Han Shuo's side. He was probably busy with something. Dwarves are really a strange race. Some dwarves are skilled at forging ironware, some are skilled at brewing fine wine, and some love to cook. When they fall in love with their craft, they can always bring some incredible masterpieces to people. The dwarves in this shop come from a remote mountain range in Kasi Empire. The joy of their life is to cook all kinds of delicious food. The food made by their hands is simply unforgettable, Phoebe explained to Han Shuo with a smile. Han Shuo, who came from another world, had enjoyed the influence of China's culinary culture. After tasting some of the food in this world, he always felt that the difference between the food here and the extensive and profound culinary culture of China was simply not small at all. To be honest, Han Shuo really didn't believe that the food here would be more exquisite and tasty than what Han Shuo had eaten in hotels before. Therefore, he didn't hold much hope and just smiled in response to Phoebe's words. The business here was very good. From the number of customers and their status, it could be seen that the extravagant customers didn't dislike the small size of this place. When Han Shua's sharp eyes were covered by his eyelids, Han Shua's heartbeat and breathing became abnormally steady, as if he was unconscious and unconscious. The two slowly approached from afar. Belinda wore her black veil as usual, her bright eyes fixed on Han Shua without blinking. The other person was rather old. His hair and beard were grayish-brown, and his face was densely covered with wrinkles that looked like ravines. He wore a thick gray cotton coat and held a crooked walking stick in his left hand. His grayish-white eyes looked listless. He walked over slowly while sizing up the surroundings. He wasn't just looking at Han Shua. "Belinda, wait." The old man suddenly spoke when Belinda was 10 meters away from Han Shua. His voice was hoarse and deep. Belinda, who had been staring fixedly at Han Shua, immediately stopped when she heard his shout. She turned to look at the old man in confusion and asked, "Lord Edwin, what is it?" The old man of the Calamity Church, called Edwin's originally grayish-white, listless eyes circled the scene once more before finally focusing on Han Shua. He said in a hoarse voice, "There's no blood on his body and no signs of injury. He likely didn't suffer any injuries from the explosion of that woman's corpse. Judging from the distance, he may have been drugged and fainted, but we still need to be a bit more cautious." "Then what do you think we should do?" Belinda didn't continue to approach Han Shua after hearing his words and even took a few steps back, finally standing shoulder to shoulder with Edwin. "Shoot an arrow at his body. With the strength of my potion, he won't feel anything at all if he's really been drugged and fainted," Edwin said. Han Shua cursed inwardly and thought to himself that this old fart was indeed sinister and ruthless to think of such a malicious plan. This person gave Han Shua a strong sense of danger, but Han Shua understood from the condition of his body that he wasn't an expert swordsman or knight. He must be an expert mage with a weak body, but with a wondrous technique. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been so afraid to approach Han Shua. Belinda laughed lightly and readily agreed when she heard Edwin's instructions. She'd already taken out a bow and arrow and aimed it crookedly at Han Shua from afar. It was obvious that Belinda wasn't an expert marksman. Her hands weren't steady at all, and even when she aimed at Han Shua, the bow trembled. Because they were so close, Han Shua could still feel Belinda's bow and arrow even with his eyes closed. Her arms made light sounds when they came into contact with her armpits. This made Han Shua's heart flutter and he quickly considered whether or not he should take the gamble. If Han Shua suddenly attacked now, Han Shua didn't have any confidence that he could kill the two of them due to the distance and the fact that the two of them were already on their guard. Not to mention that Han Shua had no idea what methods Edwin had. It wasn't wise to take such a risk. When Belinda knocked an arrow, Han Shua hardened his heart in the time it took for a spark to fly off a flint. He prepared himself to receive the arrow with his strong body. From Belinda and Edwin's conversation, Han Shua understood that they didn't want to kill him immediately. It seemed that they had other plans for him. It was from this point that Han Shua made up his mind. "Do it." Edwin's voice was low as he urged Belinda. "All right," Belinda replied. Then, she drew her bow and shot out an arrow with a whoosh. As Han Shua was on tenterhooks, the arrow landed on the snow on his left arm and didn't even touch his body. It looked like Belinda's archery skills were abnormally bad. She hadn't hit her target at such a close distance. "It doesn't matter, we have a lot of time. You'll get the hang of it if you shoot a few more arrows." There was no emotion in Edwin's voice as he spoke slowly. His eyes suddenly lit up as he spoke and focused on Han Shua's body, as if he wanted to glean some clues from Han Shua's body. "All right, I'll try a few more times." Belinda responded and shot out another 3 arrows. All 3 arrows missed their mark and none landed on Han Shua's body. Belinda was a bit annoyed as she snorted lightly and took out another arrow. She didn't take much aim this time and shot it directly at Han Shua. However, the arrow was miraculously accurate even though she hadn't taken any aim at all. It flew straight for Han Shua's calf. The arrow stabbed into Han Shua's left calf with a thud. Bright red blood slowly seeped out along his trouser leg. This level of physical pain was no longer a challenge to Han Shua. His heartbeat and breathing hadn't changed in the slightest as he'd endured the attack from start to finish. His expression was even more wooden, as if he'd truly sunk into a deep, unconscious state. "There shouldn't be any problems now." Edwin nodded after a careful look and said lowly. Belinda and Edwin then let go of their guard against Han Shua and moved closer to Han Shua. Han Shua calmed himself and focused his attention, prepared to explode and kill at any moment. He only needed to wait for the old man called Edwin to come close before making a move to kill him first. Although Belinda was also quite frightening, her golem was only a great threat in a group battle. Han Shua didn't fear her at all in a place like this. Just as Han Shua was preparing in secret, a few strange noises suddenly sounded from afar. The sounds were getting closer and closer. Han Shua was inwardly surprised as he lay on the ground, feigning unconsciousness. He didn't know who else was coming. "Chief, that person is here." A loud shout suddenly sounded from afar as a group of more than 10 people quickly approached amidst the howling cold winds. "He dares leave the Valley of Sunshine, he must be tired of living." Florida's voice suddenly sounded in Han Shua's ears, completely out of Han Shua's expectations. "Chief Florida of the Rainbow Sickle Mercenary Band." Belinda suddenly cried out in surprise, appearing quite shocked. "I don't care who you two are, hand that kid over to me immediately," Florida said as arrogantly as ever when he arrived. The eyes of the Calamity Church member called Edwin had regained their calm as he glanced at Florida's group. He first cackled strangely and then said in a raspy voice full of hatred, "So you're Florida. It looks like I was right to come to the Valley of Sunshine this time." An enormous magical ripple suddenly emanated from Edwin's body as he spoke. The aura of dark magic suddenly spread into the surroundings, and 3 huge black palms appeared out of thin air in the direction of Florida and the others, pressing down on them with a ferocious force that seemed to be able to split the heavens and earth. All the trees and rocks in the area exploded in that moment. Chapter 201. With a muffled groan, Dark Grand Magus Edwin's body swayed as he flew into the air like a willow catkin. Han Shua's knife-like palm cut through the air, emitting soft hissing sounds. The demon's lair edge embedded in Edwin's back was pulled by an enormous force and abruptly left his body, falling to the ground in the distance. Blood dripping from Edwin's back, Edwin's expression was savage as he chanted a spell. Another hand of death appeared out of thin air and pressed down on Han Shua's head like a mountain. An enormous aura enveloped Han Shua's body, almost making it hard for Han Shua to breathe. With a thought, the demon's lair edge that had already flown into the distance turned into a streak of light and shot towards Han Shua's direction. Han Shua suddenly deployed the art of the demonic ninth heavens. When the hand of death pressed down on his head, Han Shua pierced through the enormous aura enveloping his body like a sharp arrow and shot towards the direction that Florida and the others had fled in. Edwin had already increased the distance between Han Shua and Edwin when his second attack missed. The speed at which Edwin had shot into the sky just now was clearly much faster than the Archmage Emily. Han Shua might have been able to hold his own against Florida with his strength, but as a dark Grand Magus, Edwin's terrifying strength wasn't something that Han Shuo could handle at the moment. Therefore, he immediately retreated when he saw that the situation wasn't looking good. "Treacherous young man, you must die." Edwin's voice was raspy as he called out from the air. He actually ignored Belinda and shot straight for Han Shuo. He couldn't beat Edwin in a fight, but the high speed and agility of the art of the demonic ninth heavens immediately displayed its advantage in running away. He gradually pulled away from Edwin. Suddenly, a group of 10 or so people appeared in front of him. Florida's long hair floated in the air as several experts of the Rainbow Sickle Mercenary Band dashed through the dense forest like lightning. The Rainbow Sickle Mercenary Band had left the Valley of Sunshine to target Han Shuo. Therefore, they'd only dispatched a few experts. How could he have known that his luck would be so bad, encountering the dark great magical tutor Edwin who had a grudge against Florida's grandfather? That was why he ended up in such a miserable state. Fleeing in the same direction, Han Shuo's speed was obviously faster than Florida's group. Being able to catch up with them halfway was within Han Shuo's expectations. Chuckling coldly, Han Shuo approached from behind and used the agility of the art of the demonic ninth heavens to leisurely hang on Florida and the others. As Han Shuo chanted, bone spear after bone spear shot towards Florida like cold lightning. "Damn it!" Florida heard the whistling sound of bone spears piercing through the air as he turned his head to see 3 bone spears shooting towards his back. He then saw the sinister expression on Han Shuo's face as he looked at him with a cold smile. He couldn't help but curse out loud. A ball of blinding light emanated from the staff in Florida's hand as the radiant sword slash appeared and shattered the 3 bone spears. But at this moment, the difference between the levitation spell and Han Shuo's art of the demonic ninth heavens became apparent. Han Shuo's speed wasn't affected in the slightest after chanting the same spell, but Florida's originally fast-flying speed was reduced by a third. Han Shuo understood that Edwin was rapidly approaching as the strange sound of the wind drew near. A mocking smile played at the corner of his lips as Han Shuo slowed down once again and continued to hang behind Florida like a vengeful spirit. He chanted the bone spear spell again and sent out another 3 bone spears. Florida wasn't afraid of Han Shuo, but he was extremely afraid of Edwin. If Edwin hadn't been chasing after him, Florida would have stopped without hesitation and fought Han Shuo with the force of a thunderbolt. However, he obviously didn't want to be caught up to by Edwin because of Han Shuo. Therefore, he could only continue to defend helplessly as his flying speed decreased again and again. "Chief, we'll help you hold him off. You should leave first." At this moment, one of the Rainbow Sickle Mercenary Band experts in front of Florida yelled out loudly and suddenly stopped where they were. They'd all witnessed Edwin's strength just now. If they stayed behind, they might be able to hold off Han Shuo, but they would be hard-pressed to escape Edwin's murderous hands. It looked like they'd already made up their minds to die when they said these words at this moment. "All right, I'll avenge you." Florida was indeed a vicious and merciless character. Although he couldn't bear to do so, he still decisively agreed to the other's suggestions. He glared viciously at Han Shuo and continued to walk forward without stopping. 2 crossbows suddenly took aim at Han Shuo. The 2 mercenaries' gazes were so sharp that Han Shuo felt a bone-piercing sense of danger. 2 whooshing sounds rang out as the 2 crossbow bolts shot towards Han Shuo with terrifying speed and accuracy that surpassed Han Shuo's imagination. Han Shuo, who'd been rushing forward, abruptly retreated, not daring to take another step forward. The divine archers knocked their arrows in this process and aimed them at Han Shuo. There was a clear difference compared to Belinda's archery just now. Even though Han Shuo was already in the air, he couldn't escape the threat below him and had no choice but to retreat once again. However, Edwin's figure was already approaching from the distance at this moment. It looked like he'd be here before long. Han Shuo hesitated for a moment and decided to immediately change directions. It was at this moment that the rainbow sickle mercenaries below him suddenly began to panic. A ball of dazzling, milky white sword light exploded out from the middle of them. Trunks, riding on his manticore, swung his sword with a callous expression, forcing the rainbow sickle mercenaries to no longer have the energy to deal with Han Shuo. Trunks. Han Shuo was flabbergasted when he saw the abnormalities below him. He couldn't help but cry out in joy as he dived down. Continue to chase after Florida through the air. I'll be in charge of intercepting these traitors below who deserve to die 1,000 times over. We'll continue our discussion when we return to the Valley of Sunshine. The extraordinarily handsome Trunks raised his head and flashed a radiant smile at Han Shuo. He continued to attack the rainbow sickle mercenaries on his manticore. Trunks, don't go too far. The rainbow sickle mercenary who'd spoken earlier suddenly glared angrily at Trunks. You're going too far. Although he'd walked out of the bone cage, Florida's face was even paler. It was obvious that he'd expended too much mental strength and had exceeded the limits of his body. At this moment, Han Shuo suddenly drew near again. The cold light of the demon's lair edge carried with it the determination to kill as it pierced towards Florida's neck. The magic staff in Florida's left hand suddenly exploded with white light as an enormous force erupted from within. Florida threw the magic staff out to meet Han Shuo's demon's lair edge. Clang! The sound of metal colliding rang out. Florida's staff, made of some unknown material, was pierced through by the demon's lair edge, which had been infused with magical yuan. However, there was a force contained within the magic staff that obstructed Han Shuo for a moment, causing Han Shuo to involuntarily pause in midair. On the other side, Florida had thrown away his magic staff. Blood flowed from the corner of his mouth and flowed down his neck to stain his chest. His originally handsome face was now as pale as a sheet of white paper. The blood at the corner of his mouth made his appearance even more frightening as he flew towards the Valley of Sunshine at an unsteady pace. High-quality magic staffs could store a portion of the user's magical elements and release them at the most critical moment. Florida's actions just now had obviously been to make use of the last moment to detonate the magical elements within the magic staff and obstruct Han Shuo's killing blow. Perhaps he'd received some sort of message from the Cairo mercenary band's vice chief, the berserker Harris, was watching from afar with a few experts by his side. They'd long since seen the battle outside, but had only watched from the sidelines and hadn't come out to interfere. Everyone in Tanai was well aware of the enmity between the Cairo mercenary band and the Rainbow Sickle mercenary band. As long as Florida entered Tanai, the Cairo mercenary band had the duty to interfere. However, now that Han Shuo and Florida were fighting outside the valley, with Harris's hatred for the Rainbow Sickle mercenary band, he probably wanted nothing more than for Florida to be killed by Han Shuo. Pausing for a moment, Han Shuo saw that Florida was about to charge into the Valley of Sunshine and that Edwin had reappeared behind him. Han Shuo immediately circulated his magical yuan to the limit without hesitation and transformed into a streak of light smoke in the air, shooting straight for Florida. Suddenly, a fire dragon soared into the air and exploded out of the Valley of Sunshine's fences, abruptly sweeping towards Han Shuo. Han Shuo had been planning on killing Edwin when he couldn't help but change directions and dodge. He first used the dark mist to move stealthily and then summoned a zombie as a target to unleash the fury of the fire dragon. When the three of them arrived, he slammed against the wall 5 times in a row before finally throwing the boulder on his body to the side with a loud rumble. The entire ground trembled as if there was an earthquake, and the loud rumbling reverberated throughout the building. When Han Shuo and the other two arrived, the burly man slammed into the pillar 5 times before finally throwing the rock on his back to the side. The entire ground trembled as if there was an earthquake, and the loud rumbling sounds lingered in the building. Han Shuo's heart couldn't help but tremble as he knew that the strength of this person's physical body had already reached an astonishing level. "Trunks, why have you come back?" The burly man's eyes shone with a strange light as he looked at Trunks in astonishment. "Loriton, it's been a few years since we've seen each other. It looks like your physical body has already been tempered to the extreme. You could already go berserk twice before, and it looks like you've gone up another level now. I wonder if you can go berserk thrice and reach the legendary 3 strong levels of the berserkers." Trunks revealed an expression of interest as he stared at Loriton. Revealing a strange smile, Loriton didn't respond to Trunks' question and focused his attention on Han Shuo, saying, "You're the one who almost killed Florida." Nodding, Han Shuo said with a smile, "Indeed. What instructions do you have for me, Chief Loriton? I'd like to discuss a business deal with you, but you'll have to take a punch from me first. Let me measure your strength and see if you're worth it for me to hand over that shop to you." Loriton laughed loudly as his fan-sized fist smashed towards Han Shuo's head with a forceful, domineering aura. Han Shuo was slightly startled, and then discovered that the punch had already arrived in front of him. The berserk power contained within made Han Shuo pale with fright. What surprised Han Shuo even more was that this surge of power sealed off all of Han Shuo's paths of retreat, giving him no chance of dodging at all. Han Shuo's face was aghast as he immediately focused all of his attention and circulated his magical yuan to the limit, planning on taking this punch head-on. "There's nothing to be surprised about." Han Shuo shrugged and responded with a smile. "Us berserkers have a special training method that focuses on the physical body. You're not a berserker, so how can you be like this? This is very strange." Loriton shook his head in puzzlement and responded. "Alright, I don't think you've called us over to interrogate us about these things, right?" Han Shuo calmly walked forward and sat down on a stone chair not far from Loriton. He even called Trunks and Emily over. After experiencing the exchange just now, Han Shuo understood that Loriton's strength was likely stronger than his. However, the Cairo mercenary band's current enemy was the Rainbow Sickle mercenary band that was most likely to threaten their position. Loriton definitely wouldn't harm them if he called them over, so Han Shuo was quite relaxed. Emily and Trunks also walked casually to Han Shuo's side when they saw that Han Shuo was so relaxed. They pulled over a stone chair and sat down. "Harris, how's Florida's condition after returning to the Rainbow Sickle mercenary band?" Loriton actually revealed a look of praise when he saw Han Shuo and the others' casualness. He turned his head to look at Harris and asked. "After entering the valley this morning, Florida suddenly fainted in front of Tunai's door and was then brought back to the Rainbow Sickle mercenary band. According to our observations, Florida hasn't woken up yet, so we don't know what his current condition is." Harris displayed the proper respect and facing Loriton and quickly responded to Loriton's question. Nodding, Loriton rubbed his shiny bald head, seeming to ponder something. After a while, Loriton looked at Han Shuo and said in a loud voice, "Your strength isn't bad. I'd originally hoped that you'd consider joining our Cairo mercenary band, but since you know Trunks, you probably won't be willing to join us. I'm well aware of Florida's strength. I tested you just now, and I think it's impossible for you to heavily injure him with your strength alone. Not to mention that he has some experts from the Rainbow Sickle mercenary band with him. Can you tell me what's going on?" "An enemy helped me. Edwin, who came in this morning, is an enemy of Florida's grandpa. Florida ran into Edwin on the way, and the two of them fought in the end. I just happened to take advantage of the situation. Han Shuo answered honestly. There was nothing to hide about this matter now that the facts were laid out in front of him. Edwin, the Calamity Church's dark Grand Magus Edwin. That old monster has entered the valley. Loratan was startled and turned to look at Harris. It should be him. There's also a masked woman who entered the valley after a while and is currently with him. Harris nodded and responded to Loratan. This person is very difficult to deal with. Is he your enemy? Loratan rubbed his shiny bald head again, appearing a bit troubled. Loratan, I've never heard of you being afraid of anyone in all these years. Don't tell me that you're afraid of an old man. It looks like although your strength has increased, your courage has shrunk. Trunks seemed to know Loratan's habit when he saw him rub his head and couldn't help but mock him. I'm not afraid of him, I'm just afraid of the Calamity Church behind him. This is the strongest evil cult on the profound continent. They never follow the rules or reason when they do things, and their power is enormous. Once provoked, it'll be a battle to the death. I'm afraid that any country on the continent would be very wary of them, not to mention our Valley of Sunshine. Loratan rubbed his head and said in annoyance. The Calamity Church was the calamity and nightmare of the entire continent. They held some unreasonable and crazy obsessions and used their power to destroy all people or countries that didn't match their wishes. Even the Lancelot Empire treated the Calamity Church as if they were facing a great enemy, not to mention a large mercenary band. Just from this point, it could be seen that the Calamity Church was indeed very frightening. Edwin is my enemy, and also Florida's enemy. Now that he's arrived in Tanai, I think he'll definitely make a move. Han Shuo didn't have any expression on his face as he spoke indifferently. I've heard that Miss Phoebe of Buzd is helping you purchase a shop. That shop is in a forbidden area in Tanai. It's said that it's been cursed by an evil god. Anyone who takes over that shop will have their blood sucked dry and die. Do you really want that shop? Loratan didn't speak about Edwin and instead brought up this matter with interest. That's right, I've never believed in the curse of an evil god. I hope Chief Loratan can sell that shop to me. Han Shuo admitted frankly and said to Loratan. Brian, why would you want that shop? I've heard a bit about that place. Many people died there when the Rainbow Sickle mercenary band was in power. We even went in to investigate, but didn't find anything. It's an ominous place, don't take the risk. Trunks was quite surprised when he heard of this matter and turned back with a frown to persuade Han Shuo. Emily was also taken aback and turned to look at Han Shuo. She exclaimed, No, don't take the risk. I've also heard of that place, there are some unbelievable curses in there. You can't take that place. There are still a few empty shops in Tanai. I just want to know, why have you set your eyes on that one? Loratan obviously didn't care about Han Shuo's death. He only cared about Han Shuo's intentions, so he asked about Han Shuo's intentions. I can't say anything about this, but I hope you can give that shop to me. I'll pay you a reasonable price. Han Shuo understood from Loratan's words that Phoebe hadn't succeeded yesterday. Loratan looked like a brawny, simple-minded man, but Han Shuo knew that this person wasn't as simple as he appeared. Otherwise, he would have already sold the cursed land to Phoebe without a care in the world. Of course, this is your private matter and I have no right to interfere. However, I'm the one in charge of Tanai's shop, so I have the right not to sell it to you. Loratan laughed heartily with a confident expression. Taking a deep breath, Han Shuo said, All right, I won't force you since you don't want to sell it. If there's nothing else, I think we can leave now. It looks like there's nothing worth staying in the Valley of Sunshine. We should leave. Perhaps you really do have to leave, but Trunks should stay. Heh, isn't that right, Trunks? Loratan said with a calm expression as he gazed at Trunks. Trunks snorted coldly and glared angrily at Loratan. It was obvious that Loratan had hit the nail on the head. Han Shuo was determined to obtain the place of extreme water in the place of extreme Yin. Han Shuo had only pretended to leave because he wanted to haggle with Loriton. He'd absorbed Johnny's soul last time, and it was only now that he'd completely digested it. Some messy information chaotically swayed in Han Shuo's mind. All sorts of messy memories were like clouds of smoke, making it hard for one to see clearly. Han Shuo understood that these messy information were all memories that Chu Kanglan had left in his mind. All this time, because Han Shuo's magical yuan hadn't reached the true demon realm, his brain hadn't been fully developed. Therefore, he could only receive bits and pieces of information every time. Most of his memories were still sealed in his mind. Now that he'd reached the true demon realm and his brain had been fully expanded by magical yuan, Han Shuo's memory, comprehension, and thinking abilities had all been greatly improved. When Han Shuo tried his best to explain himself, the originally blurry and messy memories were quickly torn apart and gradually became clear. Strange magical yuan techniques, sections of mysterious cultivation incantations, refining methods for all kinds of magical weapons, magical generals, and magical formations were all being rapidly processed in Han Shuo's mind. They were all imprinted in Han Shuo's mind, forever becoming an indelible memory in Han Shuo's mind. After an unknown period of time, Han Shuo suddenly woke up. Under the impact of the dripping waterfall, his eyes couldn't hide the excitement, pride, and confidence in himself. It was as if he'd been reborn, and his entire being was filled with an unprecedented confidence. Body consolidation, channel opening, molded spirit, true demon, bloodthirsty, separate demon, carnal, 9 changes, and omen realm. These 9 layers of magical yuan would allow a mortal to become an omnipotent godlike existence. That kind of terrifying power that could split the heavens and the earth apart, when the physical body was strong enough to move mountains and seas, and become an extraordinary existence that was immortal, presented a vast, mysterious, and grand blueprint in front of Han Shuo. Now that this blueprint had been unlocked, Han Shuo was like a paintbrush that could draw out his vast and limitless future according to the path in his heart. The power to reconstruct the physical body, fly in the sky, become immortal, surpass the cycle of reincarnation, and destroy the heavens and the earth really did exist. With a thought, the pores of all the muscles in his body expelled waves of murky gray air from his body. The murky air was the impurities of Johnny's soul. After Han Shuo's demon infant had absorbed the origin of the soul, it remained in his body. With a slight sway of his body, Han Shuo's boulder-like body suddenly flew through the air and landed steadily on a large tree. He put on a dark green warrior's robe and flew straight towards the cemetery of death. Master, you seem to be a bit different than usual. Gilbert looked at Han Shuo in surprise as soon as he entered the cemetery of death and couldn't help but exclaim. Oh, what's different? Chapter 208. After Han Shuo's torment, the shop had truly become a place of great danger. Without Han Shua's guidance, anyone who tried to enter would be attacked by the demonic formation. Those with insufficient willpower would lose their minds and seek their own deaths. After the shop had been completely remodeled, Phoebe, Emily, and Gilbert all took up residence. The three of them were on tenterhooks the entire night when they saw the strangeness of the yard, deathly afraid that something would happen to them while they slept soundly. The night passed peacefully, and Trunks returned at noon the next day after having been gone for a few days. As soon as Trunks entered the Valley of Sunshine, he learned from Harris of the Cairo mercenary band that Han Shua's group had moved to the cursed shop. When Trunks arrived, he found that there were suddenly 6 white stone pillars in the yard. He was quite flabbergasted and didn't know what was going on. When I came over, I heard from Harris that something strange happened here last night. Did you guys run into something? Trunks asked when he sat down in the living room of the shop. Smiling faintly, Han Shua explained, we did indeed run into something, but it wasn't some evil god's curse. I created it myself. You don't need to worry about anything, there are quite a few rooms here. I've already reserved one for you. Forget it, it's safer for me to change places. I've seen many owners of this shop die mysteriously in Tanai of Sunshine a few years ago. Although you said that the danger has been resolved, I'm still a bit worried. Trunks was obviously traumatized and immediately waved his hands with a wry smile. Who is this kid? He dares not believe in Master. Dark Dragon Gilbert was in a bad mood after being called a perverted pervert. He couldn't help but yell when he heard Trunks waffle and refuse to stay. And who are you? Trunks started and suddenly looked at Gilbert. The manticore that Trunks had been riding had already displayed abnormalities when he'd entered. The originally fearless manticore was instinctively on guard against Gilbert. It tried not to get too close to Gilbert. As a magical beast with intelligence, the manticore could naturally sense the powerful presence of the super-rank Dark Dragon. Even though Gilbert had transformed into his human form, the manticore still did not dare to approach Gilbert. This was a fear brought about by the difference in rank. As the manticore's master, Gilbert had been with the manticore for a few years and was very familiar with its temperament. Seeing that the manticore was behaving so strangely, Gilbert, who had noticed it from the start, couldn't help but ask. I am the mighty Black Dragon clan, the future most outstanding king, Gilbert. Gilbert had an arrogant look on his face as he shouted in a booming voice. Just like your manticore, he's my magical pet, a lecherous little dark dragon. Han Shua flicked a glance at Gilbert and explained to Trunks. Trunks was very shocked when he heard that Gilbert was a dark dragon. He then couldn't help but sigh, you're really something. I thought taming a manticore was already something to be proud of, but you actually have a dark dragon. It looks like you're a bit stronger than me. It's not my fault, I just happened to pick up a bargain. It was this dark dragon who shamelessly pestered me. Han Shua shrugged and said modestly. He then paused and changed his tone, asking Trunks, right, you didn't run into any danger when you left the valley this time, did you? How did things go? Trunks' face grew serious when he saw that Han Shua was talking about serious matters. He said lowly, don't worry, I'm more familiar with the geography of the Valley of Sunshine than Lorton and Florida. It won't be easy for anyone to harm me in the Valley of Sunshine. I've met with some of my old friends and they've expressed great interest in forming a mercenary band. I've already arranged for people to apply for the title of Soul Destroyer. We'll be able to officially have our own title before long. Nodding, Han Shua said, that's good. This will be our base of operations now. With Florida's power, he'll surely be able to find our current location. We don't need to be in a hurry, we just need to wait for him to attack us. With the existence of the magical formation, Han Shua wanted to test it out on Florida's men. He wanted to see if the magical formation was as wondrous as Chu Kanglin's memories had described. Unexpectedly, neither Florida's men nor Edwin came looking for trouble after another 2 days. Han Shua's group stayed here for the past 2 days, only wandering around the busy merchant streets for a bit during the day. All the materials needed to refine the wood elite zombie had finally been gathered. Phoebe used these days to discuss a few deals with a few merchants, exchanging 2/3 of the jewels and crystals that Han Shua had given her for 40,000 gold coins. These 40,000 gold coins were handed over to Trunks with great trust by Han Shua, allowing him to use them reasonably to form the Soul Destroyer mercenary band. Han Shua silently practiced his magical arts in his room, not taking a single step out of the shop in the past 2 days. After a low incantation, the courtyard that was illuminated by the sun was suddenly covered by dark green clouds, plunging the entire courtyard into darkness. The sinister greenish-black clouds engulfed the entire radiance of the sun. A strong deathly aura spread rapidly, filling the courtyard in an instant. The vengeful spirits sealed in the stone pillars sensed this wonderful aura and seemed to be eager to make a move. The canopy of necromancy spell could cause the aura of death to spread out. Dark creatures within the range of the canopy of necromancy would greatly increase their attack power. Once an enemy fell within the range of the canopy of necromancy, their fighting strength would be weakened by the spell. Not only had Han Shua grasped all of the spells that adept mages should be able to grasp now, but he could also skillfully use them. If he returned to the Babylon Academy of Magic and Force with his current strength, Han Shua was confident that he could easily advance to Adept Mage. According to his agreement with Fanny, as long as Han Shua advanced to Adept Mage, he would have the right to interact with her. Whenever he thought of Fanny's feelings for him, Han Shua felt extremely motivated. Although he now possessed the hearts of 2 beauties, Emily and Phoebe, his feelings for Fanny were irreplaceable by the 2 women. Han Shua had never slacked off on his magical arts training. However, at this stage, the demon infant needed some soul energy to replenish and strengthen. Just relying on hard training wouldn't allow him to make great progress in a short period of time. Therefore, Han Shua was waiting for an opportunity to find the souls of some experts to replenish the nutrients that his demon infant needed. One evening, as Han Shua was cultivating his magical arts with his eyes closed, he suddenly felt the call of the little skull. An anxious emotion suddenly came from a distant plane. The little skull's call was urgent, and carried a kind of panic as if he was struggling to avoid danger. With his previous experience, Han Shua immediately knew that the little skull must have run into danger again. Without thinking too much, Han Shua immediately chanted an incantation through the connection between the 2 of them, attempting to summon the little skull from the distant plane to him. After the incantation was completed, the space in front of him suddenly seemed to have been sliced open by a sharp knife. The little skull's 7 bone spurs flickered as it shot out from the torn space like lightning. However, behind the little skull, the torn space suddenly reflected the figure of a giant knight that was 5 to 6 meters tall, riding a strange fire horse, and wielding a broadsword that was 2 meters long. A huge rotten aura came from this giant shadow. The overwhelming aura of death was so strong that it made people's hearts tremble. This dark creature from another world was restricted by the laws of space, and it could only reveal a huge shadow. Then, when the little skull landed in front of Han Shua, the torn space suddenly returned to normal, and the huge aura disappeared without a trace. The astonished little skull held his bone knife in his left hand and the eye patch in his right hand. After losing the eye patch in his left eye, the purple demon eye that the little skull obtained from the Dad-era demon statue blinked and shone with a purple light as he stared blankly at Han Shua. Suddenly, a huge force burst out from the purple demon eye in the left eye of the little skull. This force instantly burst out, and with the purple demon eye as the center, it tried to invade the bodies of the little skull and Han Shua, intending to take control of the bodies of the little skull and Han Shua. Just like the situation in the Holy Land of Forest Troll, this force came from the purple demon eye. It was filled with a violent desire to plunder everything, and it would suddenly attack after the eye patch was taken off, as if the demon Dad-era demon had really left a part of her divine sense in the purple demon eye. Put on the eye patch, hurry up. Han Shua's entire body trembled from the pain, as if several sharp knives were violently stirring in his mind. He suddenly yelled out, his body trembling with pain. The little skull was also suffering. He fell to the ground and kept rolling. After receiving the order from Han Shua, he finally put on the eye patch with trembling hands. Miraculously, the force that invaded the bodies of the two disappeared without a trace as the eye patch was put on. However, just as Han Shua heaved a sigh of relief and turned to look at the little skeleton, he saw purple light shoot out of the little skeleton's left eye. The eye patch that he'd been using to cover his purple demon eye seemed to be incinerated by a raging fire, turning into sparks and disappearing in the wind. She hadn't quite believed it at first, but now that she'd seen the little skull's performance, she was convinced without a doubt. Han Shua didn't feel anything when Emily and Gilbert entered. The enormous power from the purple demon eye allowed Han Shua to focus his attention to the extreme, completely unaffected by the various disturbances of the outside world. Some demonic practitioners would need to find an extremely quiet place to train in seclusion when they needed to practice a certain secret art or demonic treasure. They would also need to set up layers of defensive measures to prevent others from disturbing them. The reason why they were so cautious was because that state was when the demonic practitioner would be least prepared. They couldn't be disturbed in the slightest when refining demonic treasures or practicing demonic arts. Otherwise, it was very likely that they would suffer chi deviation and waste all their previous efforts. Another 2 days and 2 nights passed after Han Shua's preparations. Han Shua didn't take a single step out of his room during these 2 days and 2 nights. Phoebe, Emily, and Trunks didn't slack off during these 2 days. They were either busy with the matters of establishing the mercenary band or continuing to discuss business to help Han Shua sell the jewels and items. On this day, in the middle of the night, a few people were in the shop discussing how to make better use of the gold coins and manage the mercenary group's affairs. Suddenly, a mercenary from the Cairo mercenary group knocked on the door and said that a group of people were on their way. The mercenary from the Cairo mercenary group immediately left after reporting this information. He said that he needed to report this information to the leader or vice leader of the Cairo mercenary group. He told Emily and the others to be careful and that their people would arrive within half an hour. It looks like the Rainbow Sickle mercenary band has arrived. Brian can't be disturbed at the moment, and we don't know when he'll wake up either. This is a bit troublesome. Emily said with a slight frown after the mercenary left. Who cares who they are? If they dare trespass here, we'll make them suffer the consequences. Dark Dragon Gilbert obviously didn't take this matter to heart as he spoke carelessly. It won't be that easy to deal with. Florida's Rainbow Sickle mercenary band is full of experts, and the Church of Light has also sent some experts to him. You may not be able to win even if you transform into your dragon form. Trunks' brow was also deeply furrowed as he spoke lowly. Brian can't be disturbed right now. There's that dark creature protecting him inside and he shouldn't be able to leave. We must protect him if he's here. As long as we hold them off for a while and wait for the Cairo mercenary band to arrive, then there won't be any problems. Phoebe thought for a moment and responded. The hoofbeats of the warhorses resounded in the silent night sky. From the volume of the sound, one could tell that the hooves of the warhorses were covered by something soft like cotton cloth. Be careful, protect Brian's room first. Emily called out lightly and instructed the others, you're tuning into the Han Lee's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.